Part 2. The inner domain. The temperament. What man is happy? He who has a healthy body, a resourceful mind, and a docile nature. Thales. The body is just one vehicle for our self-discipline. History is replete with talented people, athletes, creatives, executives who had complete command of their physical form, but were profoundly a mess everywhere else. It doesn't matter how much discipline we exert over what we eat or when we wake up if we are riven by distraction, at the mercy of biases or bad moods, given over to temptation, impulses, or instinct. This is no way to live. In fact, this intemperance condemns a person to never reach their full potential, with perpetual misery as a possible chaser. True self-control means moderation, not just in what we do, but also how we think, how we feel, how we comport ourselves in a world of chaos and confusion. If anything, these traits matter more. An observer of Franklin Delano Roosevelt once quipped that the man had a second-class intellect and a first-class temperament. Given what disease took from Roosevelt's body, the truth of the remark is all the more illustrative. Temperament is everything. Our head and our heart combine to form a kind of command system that rules our lives. Millions of years of evolution have combined to give us these gifts. Will we command them as tools? Or will we let them languish, allowing ourselves instead to be jerked around like puppets? You decide. Ruling over yourself. You could say it was in her from the beginning. Churchill certainly saw it. Upon meeting the baby who would become the great Queen Elizabeth II, Britain's longest-serving monarch and likely the longest serving in all of history, he noted, she has an air of authority and reflectiveness that's astonishing in an infant. But of course, the throne then lay some 2.5 decades in the future, on the other side of a world war and an abdication crisis. What Churchill sensed that day were the beginnings of the temperament that created an incredible life of self-control, service, and perseverance. A mental and emotional discipline that has rarely been seen, before or since, in the halls of grand palaces, especially in 25-year-olds who have suddenly become empresses or emperors. We want to think of leaders as bold and brash, charismatic and inspiring. We expect them to be ambitious, we even excuse tragic flaws or disturbing vices, as long as they're winning or entertaining us. This no doubt makes them compelling, but is it the right recipe for stable, sustainable stewardship of a nation, a business, a sports franchise? More important, is that the only way? Plato had a different ideal in mind, asking for a monarch who was young, and possessed by nature of a good memory, quick intelligence, courage, and nobility of manner, and let that quality, temperance as the necessary accompaniment of all the parts of virtue, attend now also on our monarch's soul, if the rest of his qualities are to be of any value. Born in 1926, Elizabeth had royal blood but no clear path or even expectation to power. Certainly, few pegged her to fulfill that ancient philosopher's ideal. She was the daughter of the second son of King George V. It was only after the rash decision of her uncle Edward VIII to walk away from the crown to marry a twice-divorced Nazi sympathizer and then the early death of her father, that Elizabeth's destiny was set. Whatever Churchill had seen in her as a child, whatever Plato hoped for, she would have to cultivate, making, willing herself into the Queen Elizabeth, one of most admired and enduring figures on the planet. From the day of her coronation, Elizabeth would reign but not rule, as the expression goes, holding with perfect grace a unique and terrible job. What does the modern British sovereign do? It's hard to say. It's easier to list all the things they can't do. She can't pass laws. She can't choose who leads the government. She can't start wars. She's not even supposed to speak about matters of policy. And yet, the irony of this powerlessness is all the power required to wield it. The Queen has been duly informed of every action and problem inside the United Kingdom for 69 years, in the form of daily dispatches and weekly conferences with the Prime Minister. At the same time, she is not allowed to overtly act on any of this information. She cannot, in any way whatsoever, involve herself in The matters of state, all of which is done literally in her name. This is precisely what Elizabeth has managed to do with near superhuman dignity through 12 prime ministers, 14 U.S. presidents, and 7 popes. On her 21st birthday in 1947, the future queen would detail her commitment to this idea in a now famous radio address, telling the people of what was then called the British Empire that I declare before you all that my whole life, whether it be long or short, shall be devoted to your service and the service of our great imperial family to which we all belong. A few years later, she would express her sense of duty in place. More explicitly, I cannot lead you into battle, I do not give you laws, or administer justice, but I can do something else, I can give you my heart and my devotion to these old islands and to all the peoples of our brotherhood of nations. Could she have had any idea how long this service would last? What it would take out of her? What it would demand of her? How much heart and smarts would be required? Lou Gehrig is a hero for his streak of 2,130 games played for the Yankees. Queen Elizabeth has worked every day for nearly 7 decades. For her, every day has been game day, some 25,000 in a row. She's visited more than 126 nations. In 1953, on a single royal tour, she traveled 40,000 miles, many of which were by boat. She shook 13,000 hands and received tens of thousands of bows and curtsies. She gave and listened to over 400 speeches. And this was just one of more than 100 of these royal tours during her reign. In all, she's traveled more than 1 million nautical miles by sea, and many times that by air. She's met more than 4 million people, personally had more than 2 million over for tea, and given more than 100,000 awards. Perhaps most impressive, out of hundreds of thousands of engagements, events, appearances, and meals, which were often preceded by long-distance travel and time zone changes. She has fallen asleep in public only a single time at a lecture about the use of magnets in biology and medicine in 2004 *. It goes without saying that the Queen's regular duties take immense physical discipline. "Are you tired, General?" she once asked a noticeably drooping officer accompanying her on an official visit. "No, ma'am," he replied. "Then take your hands out of your pockets and stand up straight," she told him from her 5'4" perch. Aides have noted that the Queen is as strong as a yak and can endure long periods of standing, even into old age. Harold Macmillan, her third Prime Minister, once exclaimed that the Queen had the heart and stomach of a man, which is preposterous, because not even Lou Gehrig could have put up with her travel schedule. But this marveling belies what is beneath those physical feats, the mental and emotional discipline that she quietly draws upon on. For instance, it's been said that the Queen has literally never been seen to sweat. This only makes her marathon appearances more impressive. Her body doesn't cool itself off well, but her poise and equanimity keep this fact from us. How does she do it? On a visit to the United States during the first Bush administration, an American official would accidentally chance upon the Queen in a moment of quiet preparation for what was to be a very long day. She was standing stock still, he noticed. It was as if she were looking inward, getting set. This was how she wound up her batteries. There was no chit-chat, but standing absolutely still and waiting, resting in herself. She has also, through the years, innovated in ways that make the long obligations more palatable, because why white-knuckle things if you don't have to? She spends an average of 4 seconds meeting each person. She's removed needless courses from dinners. She makes sure that speeches come after the meal instead of before, so that she can wrap up and sneak out. To palace media officials, she's known as One-Take Windsor, because, while she never rushes, she thinks through what she wants to do, and then she gets it right the first time. As they say, work smarter, not harder. Discipline isn't just endurance and strength. It's also finding the best, most economical way of doing something. It's the commitment to evolving and improving so that the tasks get more efficient as you go. A true master isn't just dominating their profession, they're also doing it with ease while everyone else is still huffing and puffing. After one tricky social encounter, the Queen was commended for being very professional. "I should be," she said, not impressed by the compliment, "given how long I've been doing it." "Don't worry about the Queen," an aide once reassured a diplomat about a long event. "She's trained for 8 hours. Actually, she's a tough enough professional to endure it for 80 years. The Briton with the stiff upper lip, the one who can so preternaturally keep calm and carry on, has become something of a cliché with the passage of time. And while it's always tricky to apply a stereotype to a diverse population, there's no question that the Queen has personified this ideal, keeping an even keel no matter the circumstances. In 1964, she serenely and calmly endured a violent anti-monarchy riot in Quebec. In 1981, she was riding on horseback when a gunman rushed her and fired 6 shots, eliciting barely a flinch from the Queen in response. In 1966, a heavy block of cement slammed into the roof of the royal car. "It's a strong car," she said as she shrugged it off. In 1982, a deranged intruder entered the Queen's bedroom, bleeding from breaking a window. Woken from a dead sleep, she could have screamed. She could have run. Instead, she politely entertained the man until she could make an attempt to summon security. But the greatness of the Queen is more than stoic endurance. The Queen is a lively, savvy woman who has managed to thrive in a position that typically brings out the worst of the people who hold it. While few would refer to her as an intellectual, indeed many sneeringly referred to her as a countryside woman with limited intelligence. In fact, her quiet brilliance is itself an illustration of her self-discipline. Starting at an early age, her father brought her into the business of state, treating her as equal. From her teens, she was advised by Churchill, and tutored twice per week for 6 years in law by one of England's greatest constitutional experts. The Queen, you can be sure, always knows more than she says. In almost every case, she is more experienced and understands the history of an issue better than the Prime Minister explaining it during their weekly audience. Yet it is they who inevitably do most of the talking and she the listening. Unlike her son, who not only thinks he's smarter than everyone else but often alienates them by insisting on it, she's fine being underestimated. She's patient enough to know she will eventually be vindicated. Smart discipline is a far rarer commodity at the top than brilliance. Temperament may be less charismatic, but it survives. It stabilizes. Still, she famously reads every dispatch in the Queen's red box, in which the most important ministerial documents are delivered to her. Many are boring. Many are mind-numbingly complex. She reads 6 newspapers each morning. She does this even though no one forces her to. No one would ever quiz her on the contents. She could instead ask for brief summaries. She could skim. But she doesn't. Even though her opportunities to use this knowledge are constitutionally limited, she does it. Why? Because it is the surest way for her to discharge her duty. There is really only one avenue to effect change available to the Queen, and in her judicious, restrained way, she uses it by asking questions. If she's concerned about something or objects to it, she requests more information above and beyond what she finds in the red box or the press. Sometimes over and over again until eventually, the potential issue becomes clear to the relevant policy makers. She doesn't blurt out what she thinks ought to be done, yet in time it becomes clear enough. Where she's been brilliant is in her quietness, one press secretary would observe. In a very noisy world where people constantly want to express themselves or overreact, what the Queen has done has been the opposite. She is not empowered to have political opinions, yet she is strong enough to do something most world leaders as well as ordinary people are powerless to do: refrain from expressing opinions about things we don't control. Elizabeth is, you might say, a lifelong student of human behavior. Instead of being frustrated by the limitations and obligations of her position, the Queen has found freedom in it, channeling that energy to productive ends. Aides will find some event excruciatingly boring. The queen, on the other hand, will have found something interesting. Didn't you realize that chap's father was the son of my father's valet? She'll be found saying with enthusiasm after a long dinner. Did you see the man's red socks? She'll ask after a public event. Why was there an extra director of music in the gallery? She'll say after a concert, noticing something that even her security team missed. What happened to the soldier? She'll ask of a young man who cut his hand on a bayonet, and his commanding officer, who thought himself too important to be concerned with such things, will have no answer. A weak mind must be constantly entertained and stimulated. A strong mind can occupy itself and, more important, be still and vigilant in moments that demand it. Of all that the queen has endured, one might think that, as a traditionalist in the most traditional of professions, she was at least protected from change. In fact, change has been the largest and most continual challenge of her life. For starters, most nations on Earth today did not exist when she was born. The world has quite literally remade itself during her reign. Her job has been to both preserve her institution while simultaneously adapting it to a rapidly changing future. She is the last bastion of standards, it has been said, and yet almost every one of those standards has been re-evaluated, adjusted, and reimagined over the years, in some cases many times. Change has become a constant, she said. Managing it has become an expanding discipline. Perhaps that is why, as part of this discipline, the royal household has adopted as a kind of motto a quote from the author Giuseppe Tomasi de Lampedusa: "If things are going to stay the same, then things are going to have to change." We have to understand, self-discipline is not keeping things exactly as they are with an iron grip. It's not resistance to any and everything. Nor would much discipline be required in a world that always stayed the same. Temperance is also the ability to adjust, to make good of any situation, to find the opportunity to grow and improve in any situation, and to be able to do this with equanimity and poise, even initiative and joy. Because what other choice do we have? Perhaps the most interesting and symbolic changes of Elizabeth's reign was her decision in 1993 to tax herself. If discipline is about holding yourself accountable, there is perhaps no better example than the decision of a monarch to propose that her own government tax her estate and income, over the objection of the Prime Minister himself. But that doesn't mean everything is up in the air. "Better not," is a popular phrase inside the palace. As in, let's not overstep. As in, let's not rush into this. As in, let's not fix what isn't broken. Let's take all things, including change, slowly. This extends to her considerable wealth and fame. Elizabeth is not an ascetic. She lives in a castle, after all. Fate gave her one, so why not enjoy it? Within bounds, this is perfectly possible for a disciplined person. While easier than grinding poverty, navigating abundance is its own challenge. To manage it, the Queen has had to live by a code, a sense of duty. I, like Queen Victoria, she has said, have always been a believer in that old maxim, moderation in all things. Younger members of her family have struggled with this kind of self-control, rebelled against it, in some disturbing cases abdicated even their basic duties as human beings. The idea that you don't get to do everything you want, that some things are non-negotiable, that the flip side of privilege is duty, and that power must be complemented by restraint. Not everyone gets that. And their shameful behavior reminds us of the consequences. It's easy to be excited. It's easy to express a preference. It's easy to be a mess too. To give yourself over to whim or to emotion or even to ambition. But to keep yourself in check? To hold yourself to standards? Especially when you could get away with less. Is it not much better to be self-controlled and temperate in all one's actions than to be able to say what one ought to do? Musonius Rufus would say back in ancient Rome. As an advisor to kings and elites, he understood, plenty of people are masters of their universe while lacking the most important power. There is power over their own minds, power over their own actions and choices. Still, it's a hard life. Imagine being so exacting, as the Queen must be, that when a speechwriter hands you a draft of an address that begins, "I am very glad to be back in Birmingham," you take the time to cross out the word very. Because it's not quite true, nor would it be sincere or fair to all the other places she has to, or never will, visit. An ordinary person could get away with a little rhetorical flourish, but you aren't a queen if you're ordinary. The difficulty of that balance. You are unlike anyone, but you have to be relatable to everyone. You have to be approachable at the same time as being above reproach. Head of state and head of church, modern and timeless, with everyone watching, ready for the slightest mistake. Does that mean she allows herself no emotion? That self-discipline means a robotic suppression of feeling? Absolutely not. Although the Queen holds herself to high standards, she is remarkably tolerant of breaches of protocol. The fan who reaches out and grabs her, the diplomat who forgets to bow. She is said to be surprisingly very easy to talk to, very quick to put others at ease. Because this, too, is part of the job. It's hard to be her, but she doesn't make that hard for you. She has received her share of criticism, too, as all public people must expect to endure. Did she run from this? Complain about it? Quite the opposite. In 1992, a painful and difficult year that included the divorces of 3 of her children, a tell-all memoir published by one of the divorcees, and a fire at Windsor Castle, her so-called annus horribilis, the Queen, still smelling of smoke from the fire, took time to specifically point out that accountability from the press was part of her job. There can be no doubt, she said, that criticism is good for people and institutions that are part of public life. No institution, city, monarchy, whatever, should expect to be free from the scrutiny of those who give it their loyalty and support, not to mention those who don't. And yet she has also reminded the British press that there is a difference between accountability and cruelty. Scrutiny can be just as effective, she said, if it is made with a touch of gentleness, good humor, and understanding. She has tried to respond with such courtesy even when it was not extended in her direction. In 1957, when the Queen was the subject of a controversial editorial that criticized her for being out of step with the times, for her stilted manner of speaking and dependence on advisors, the Queen did not take offense. In fact, she took no public notice of the criticisms at all, even when the controversy grew so great that its author, Lord Altrincham, was assaulted in the streets of London. But she did privately, and subtly, address the legitimate feedback. Some note that even her accent has slowly shifted, becoming less pronounced and aristocratic over time, a rather impressive, if mostly uncredited feat. No one lasts very long if they are afraid of change, and few are able to change if they are afraid of feedback or making mistakes. And so here she is, at the time of this writing, 95 years old. And still going. She has effectively and tirelessly served as head of state for roughly 1/6 of the Earth's surface. She's done so without personal corruption scandals, without affairs, without major missteps. If there was anyone who deserves retirement, it's her. Yet she keeps going, getting better at the most difficult job in the world as she goes. In 2013, the monarchs of Netherlands, Belgium, and Qatar would abdicate. A pope would follow suit. For the Queen, this was unthinkable. "Oh, that's something I can't do," she said. "I am going to carry on to the end." And so she has. What about you? Where is your discipline? Your poise and grace? Under pressure? You're tired? You're in an impossible situation? Get out of here. There have been plenty of leaders with more power than Queen Elizabeth. Few, however, have had more restraint. There have been plenty of gluttons, but few as quietly glorious. It was this self-command, this self-abnegation, that made her a ruler her people could be proud of. It saved her from herself, from the temptations of power, sure, and it also helped to help her outlast not just many tyrants but whole forms of tyranny itself. We have to understand, greatness is not just what one does, but also what one refuses to do. It's how one bears the constraints of their world or their profession. It's what we're able to do within limitations creatively, consciously, calmly. Most people have a job and then they go home, the Queen once reflected, and in this existence the job and the life go on together. Because you can't really divide it up. There is no better definition of the path of temperance. It's an all-consuming, full-time thing. It's the journey of a lifetime, one that gets more impressive and rewarding the longer you stay at it. Look at everything like this. George Washington saw a lot go wrong. He lost his father at age 11. His was under fire for the first time before he turned 22, when an ambush on a French fort along the Ohio River sparked the French and Indian War. The Revolutionary War, though it ended with a victory, was in reality an almost ceaseless series of defeats or setbacks, from Long Island to Kipps Bay, White Plains to Fort Washington. Throughout the 9-year war, he was in painful financial straits and at constant risk of hearing his beloved Mount Vernon might be burned. And then after, as the U.S. government floundered, he was drawn into the scrum of politics. And, ultimately, the presidency, where he was subjected to criticism in the press, difficult subordinates, and the demands of voters. When Washington was 26 years old, he watched a play about the Stoics, where he heard a phrase that he'd turn into his lifelong mantra, repeating it to himself in every stressful and challenging situation, whether it was a setback on the battlefield or the infighting between members of his cabinet. In the calm light of mild philosophy. It was in the calm and mild light that Washington approached the news that one of his generals was slandering him behind his back. It was in the calm and mild light that Washington dealt with the saddening realization that he and his wife could not have children. It was in the calm and mild light that Washington approached a mob-like meeting of his officers who threatened mutiny against the new American government, slowly, masterfully, talking them back from treason. In June 1797 alone, Washington found himself writing this reminder out in 3 separate letters, trying to stop himself from rushing to judgment or losing control of his emotions and instead looking at the situation with the temperament befitting the father of a country. Because like the rest of us, this was not his natural disposition. Washington was not exempt, a friend said, from the tumultuous passions which accompany greatness, and frequently tarnish its luster. In fact, fighting them was the first and the most prolonged battle of the man's life. It was also, the man said in his friend's eulogy, Washington's most impressive victory, so great the empire he had there acquired, that calmness of manner and of conduct distinguished him through life. The painter Gilbert Stuart spent many hours with Washington in the 1790s as he worked on a portrait of the general. What he found was a fierce, determined, and intense man. As he studied him, Stuart could feel these thunderous passions but was struck by the way that Washington's judgment and great self-command subsumed them. That was why so few had seen his temper. Washington wasn't naturally stoic, he made himself this way. Not permanently but anew every minute, every day, in every situation, as best he could. You think Washington didn't get frustrated or overwhelmed? Of course he did. Think about what he was subjected to. Yet according to Thomas Jefferson, who often openly fought with Washington, the man never acted until every circumstance, every consideration was maturely weighed. He had the initial reactions we all do, but he tried to put every situation up for a kind of review, searching for a better light to explain and understand it. We know that between every stimulus and its response, every piece of information in our decision, there is space. It is a brief space, to be sure, but one with room enough to insert our philosophy. Will we use it? Use it to think, use it to examine, use it to wait for more information? Or will we give in to first impressions, to harmful instincts, and old patterns? The pause is everything. The one before jumping to conclusions, prejudging, assuming the worst, rushing to solve your children's problems for them, or put them back to sleep, forcing a problem into some kind of box, assigning blame, taking offense, turning away in fear. As we've discussed, there is the higher self and the lower self. This aligns with two types of mental processing we do, which psychologists call thinking fast and thinking slow. Fast is often the lower self. Gut instinct is the lower self, like Theodore Roosevelt's hesitation to invite Booker T. Washington to the White House because of the political consequences. Slow is the higher self. Slow is the rational, philosophical, principled self. Really thinking about things, really thinking about who you want to be, understanding upon reflection, as Roosevelt did, that such hesitation needed to be overridden. We pause. We gather ourselves. We put it up to the light. We ask, is this true? Is it actually as upsetting as it feels? As scary or annoying as I first thought? Don't let fear or anxiety or prejudice decide. Don't let your temper decide. Let your temperament take over. Or rather, let the temperament you're striving to have, that you know your position demands you have, do its work. A leader can't make decisions on impulse. They must lead from somewhere more rational, more controlled than that. That's not to say they won't ever be tempted, that they won't have impulses. It's that they are disciplined enough not to act on them. Not until they've been put up to the test, put under or in front of the light. Whether we're talking about a post on social media or a costly mistake at work, an obvious lie someone tried to deceive us with, an insubordinate employee, a difficult obstacle, a casual insensitivity, or a complex problem, everything must be met with a measured and mellow eye. Life is going to throw so much at you, as it did to Washington, to Frankel, to Roosevelt, to every parent and person who ever lived. The question is, how are you going to look at all this? How in control are you of the light under which you must examine the events of life? Because the answer determines what you'll be able to do and, more important, who you will be. Keep the main thing the main thing. Booker T. Washington was a busy man. He ran the Tuskegee Institute, which he founded. He traveled constantly, to speak to crowds and meet with donors. He lobbied legislators, gave lectures, led fundraising campaigns, and published 5 books. How did he manage it all? It wasn't just endurance and hustle and energy. It was also the discipline to say the dreaded word no. The number of people who stand ready to consume one's time to no purpose, he said, is almost countless. Some thought him aloof. Some thought him selfish. They said things behind his back. He was too busy to notice. He knew that the main thing in life was to keep the main thing. Especially when your main thing is uplifting an entire race of people. But what is the main thing for the rest of us? That is the main question. If you don't know the answer, how can you possibly know what to say yes to and no to? How can you know what to show up to? What to wake up early for? What to practice? What to endure? You can't. You're winging it. You're vulnerable to every shiny, exciting thing that comes your way. Every, I've got a potential opportunity for you. Every, it'll only take a minute. Every, thanks in advance. Every, I know you're busy, but anyone who has not groomed his life in general towards some definite end cannot possibly arrange his individual actions properly. The writer Michel de Montaigne reminded himself, if you don't know where you're sailing, the Stoics said, no wind is favorable. This means first, the discipline to step away and think, what am I doing? What are my priorities? What is the most important contribution I make to my work, to my family, to the world? Then comes the discipline to ignore just about everything else. Because Booker T. Washington had a strong sense of purpose. Educating a generation of black men and women, he had the clarity and the urgency to reject the things that stood to consume his time in the service of some other purpose. Without that, like so many people, he'd have been eaten alive, his time and power picked apart. One request and distraction at a time. I wish I knew how people do good and long-sustained work and still keep all kinds of other lines going, social, economic, etc., John Steinbeck once wrote in the middle of the long grind of writing a novel. How do they do it? They don't. It is impossible to be committed to anything professionally or personally without the discipline to say no to all those other superfluous things. An interview request. A vibrant social media presence. A glamorous dinner party. An exotic trip. A lucrative side venture. An exciting new trend. No one is saying these things won't be fun, that they don't have potential benefits. It's simply that they also carry with them opportunity costs. They require resources and energy that each person has only so much of. The secret to success in almost all fields is large, uninterrupted blocks of focused time. And yet, how many people organize their days or lives to make this possible? And then they wonder why they are frazzled, unproductive, overwhelmed, always behind. Here is the inescapable logic: everything we say yes to means saying no to something else. No one can be two places at once. No one can give all their focus to more than one thing. But the power of this reality can also work for you. Every no can also be a yes to what really matters. To rebuff one opportunity means to cultivate another. This is the key not just to professional success but also personal happiness. When someone takes just a few minutes of your time, they aren't just robbing you, though they admit this when they ask to pick your brain and thus your pocket. They're also robbing your family. They're robbing the people who you serve. They are robbing the future. The same goes for when you agree to do unimportant things, or when you commit to too much at one time. Except this time, you are the thief. No one made you hop on the conference call. No one forced you to attend this event or accept that award. There's no law that says you have to reply to every email, return every call, have an opinion on every bit of news. In tech, they speak of feature creep when a founder or a project manager isn't disciplined enough to protect the core concept of an idea and allows too much to be jammed in it. Trying to please everyone, they end up pleasing no one. To try to do everything is to ensure you'll achieve nothing. This weaker part of ourselves that cannot say no to requests for our time, that tries to go along with everyone, perhaps deep down wants that same excuse if we agree to their thing, then we don't have to answer for the poor performance of our thing when it's time for a full accounting. It allows us to say, well, if only I weren't so busy. The self-disciplined part of us, on the other hand, says, like the Queen's motto, better not. Or maybe we just borrow the quip from E.B. White, who was asked to join some prestigious commission. I must decline, he said, for secret reasons. A clerk of Sandra Day O'Connor once said with reverence, Sandra is the only woman I know who doesn't say sorry. Women would say, sorry, I can't do that. She would just say, no. Say no. Own it. Be polite when you can, but own it. Because it's your life. And because it is your power. By seizing it, you become powerful. More powerful in fact, than some of the most powerful people in the world who happen to be slaves to their calendars and ambitions and appetites. The conquerors who rule over enormous empires but are slaves to solicitations. The billionaires who fear missing out. The leaders always chasing the shiny new thing. Who cares if you have achieved extraordinary things but are punished for it by having even less freedom day to day? It feels like you're free because you're choosing, but if the answer is always yes, that's not much of a choice. Perhaps this is what makes an anecdote about General James Mattis from his time as Secretary of Defense so unusual. Mattis, notoriously private and duty-bound, was not interested in doing the rounds of Sunday morning talk shows that Washington politicians usually line up for like hogs at the trough. He didn't care about his brand. He didn't care about playing the game. No, he wanted to work. He wanted to actually get things done. Begged, prodded, bothered, and then criticized by administration officials for not helping them get messages out. He finally called the media office and very calmly reiterated his no. I've killed people for a living, he explained. If you call me again, I'm going to fucking send you to Afghanistan. Are we clear? And that was the end of that. No one can say yes to their destiny without saying no to what is clearly someone else's. No one can achieve their main thing without the discipline to make it the main thing. Focus, focus, focus. Ludwig van Beethoven would be in the middle of a conversation, and then just disappear. Even if he was talking to a woman he was in love with, or some powerful prince or patron. When an important musical idea came to him, he would lock into it, be consumed by it, almost like he was in a trance. So instant and so deep was his focus. "Are you even listening to me?" a friend once asked. "Sorry," Beethoven replied, "I was just occupied with such a lovely, deep thought, I couldn't bear to be disturbed." They called this his raptus, his flow state, his place of deep work, the source of his musical greatness. He was being seized by the muses, but also seizing them in return, refusing to let go until he had gotten what he needed. Now, it might seem a little indulgent, even undisciplined, for an artist to simply check out like this, to be at the whim of their passing thoughts. But it's actually an act of immense self-control and focus. It's easy to stay on the surface. It's easy to be distracted with distractions. To respect the muses when they visit. To truly focus on your main thing. To ignore everything else and to follow a flit of inspiration, or put brain power towards some intractable problem you can't seem to make progress on. This is the mental challenge we have to steel ourselves for. This is what we have to cultivate the ability to do. To commit. To truly, fully, completely commit. Because it is extremely rare. In a world of distraction, focusing is a superpower. People say they're focused, but then their phone pings. They get distracted. They get tired. They try to multitask. They don't actually have the discipline to truly lock into something. Keeping the main thing is not enough. Once the plate is cleared, you must be able to put your whole mind into that main thing. It has to get all of you. The Stoics tell us that we must learn how to focus in every moment like a Roman, to seize this thought, this opportunity that is in front of us. We can't waste it. We have to winnow our thoughts, we have to narrow our gaze to what matters and commit to it. In yogic tradition, this is called ekagrata, intense focus on a singular point. The ability to put your mind fully into or onto something, allowing you to understand both it and yourself in a new way. Beethoven wasn't just known for drifting off in social conversations, but also for profound, concentrated periods of focus on a single piece of music. A symphony doesn't simply write itself. No flash of inspiration or single moment of raptus would be sufficient. It took hours, days, months, years of prolonged and exclusive dedication to every facet of the project. There is even some tragic irony in Beethoven's legendary focus. As his hearing declined, it went unnoticed by many of even his closest friends, because they assumed he was simply lost in his work. They believed he could hear them had he wanted to. They took for granted that he was just tuning the world out as he had for so many years to focus on what he really needed to hear, the muses. All artists and leaders have to develop this skill. Although Goethe and Beethoven did not get along particularly well, they were both similar in this ability. One biographer describes Goethe as an expert at ignoring things. Both he and Beethoven combined this with their ability to commit to their art, and to lock into the task or project in front of them, to legendary results. It's just a fact. The muses never bless the unfocused. And even if they did, how would they notice? We joke about the absent-minded professor, as if they're somehow less together than normal people. It's actually the exact opposite. They are showing us what full commitment looks like in practice. The rest of us are far too concerned with things that don't matter to recognize that true mental discipline comes at a cost, and they are the ones willing to pay it. So they might not be able to find their car keys, or they put on mismatching socks. In the end, what will they most likely be remembered for? The occasional social faux pas? Or the transformative work that results from their focused commitment? Every waking minute, every ounce of brain power has been marshaled toward the enormous problems they are trying to solve, or to the research they are pioneering, or to the musical revolution they are defining with each measure and movement. That means not just saying no to things, but saying yes to the critical task in front of you. So emphatically, so completely, that you don't even notice that the things you've said no to even exist. Johnny Ive, the top designer at Apple, would explain that focus is not this thing you aspire to or something you do on Monday. It's something you do every minute. Steve Jobs, he recounted, would always be asking Ive and other Apple employees about what they were focused on, and specifically, how many things have you said no to, because to focus on one thing requires not focusing on other, less important things. Epictetus reminds us that when you say, "I'll get serious about this tomorrow," or "I'll focus on it later," what you're really saying is, "Today, I'll be shameless, immature, and base. Others will have the power to distress me. No, if it's worth doing, it's worth concentrating on today. It's worth focusing on now." Because like Beethoven, none of us know how many good years we have or how long our faculties will last. We must use them while we can. Wait for this sweet fruit. Joyce Carol Oates is one of the most prolific and dedicated writers of her generation, yes. But would this be admirable if she simply rushed her books out? Obviously not. Prolific cannot be a euphemism for sloppy. It's not simply that Oates shows up and writes a lot. There is, on top of this hard, physical labor, serious mental discipline that moderates her drive to create and polish what she ultimately publishes. "I almost never publish immediately," she explained. Each one of her manuscripts, after the completion of the first draft, is placed in a drawer, where it sits, sometimes for a year or more. There, it gestates. Oates thinks about other projects. She explores other ideas. She reads more, researches more, lives more, thinks more. It's not that these first drafts aren't good. It's that we must always doubt our first burst of excitement, and indeed, anything that comes easily. Oates's patience is about acquiring perspective, about giving all the tiny decisions that go into a book enough time to get them right. It may be that she adds a few pages. It may be that she cuts whole characters or scenes. Most of the time, the changes are very minor. But the precautionary process is essential, as it is with any meaningful act of creation. When Lincoln wrote the Emancipation Proclamation, he not only waited for the right political and military moment to deliver it, but he put it aside multiple times as he was writing, like a painter with their sketches, he said, from time to time, adding a line or two, touching it up here and there, anxiously watching the progress of events. Was this easy? Waiting for the right moment, whether one is a writer or a politician, is an agonizing thing. But as Aristotle reminds us, patience is bitter, but its fruit is sweet. No matter what it is that we do, we will have to cultivate, beyond hustle and hard work, the discipline of patience. It may well be that this soft skill challenges us more than the hours in the chair or the years of grinding. When your instinct is to go, when you really want to get after it, waiting well, the waiting is the hardest part. To wait for news. To wait for the right opportunity. To wait for things to settle. To wait for the solution to come to you. To wait for people to come around. To wait while you check your assumptions. To wait and see if you think better of it. What do we get out of waiting? Well, the Bible says that through our patience we come to possess nothing less than our souls. The discipline of patience prevents us from acting on insufficient information, from picking the wrong option, from going too soon, from forcing it, from rushing people, or giving up on them, from the wrong conclusion, from missing out on all the wonderful rewards that come to those who wait. Patience, as Edison illustrated, is a primary ingredient of genius. Even fits of inspiration or flashes of brilliance are worthless without the patience to polish, refine, and ultimately release. Edison's genius was exactly this: the patient commitment to test things over and over again, to put an experiment or an invention aside until someone could procure him better raw materials, figuring out how not just to invent the light bulb, but to doggedly develop a way of delivering the electricity underground to the first block of houses, and then navigating the politics required to actually make this a reality in New York City. It is impossible for an impatient person to work with others. It is impossible for them not to make errors of judgment and of timing. It is impossible for them to do important things, because almost everything that matters takes longer than it should, certainly longer than we would like. Meanwhile, the patient person is not only easier to work with, but more protected and resilient. As Da Vinci wrote, patience serves as protection against wrongs as clothes do against cold. For if you put on more clothes as the cold increases, it will have no power to hurt you. So in like manner you must grow in patience when you meet with great wrongs, and they will then be powerless to vex your mind. Buckle up and wait. That's what it takes. We will need not just day-to-day patience, but long patience. Shackleton-level patience. To put the book in a drawer while it gestates, to go to sleep and come back to it tomorrow, to let the compounding interest do its work, to let your investment appreciate, to let your plan take effect, to let people catch up to your idea that was ahead of its time to be vindicated by events to come. But that's the point. If things went exactly the way we wanted, if it didn't demand discomfort and sacrifice and patient endurance, then no discipline would be required, and everyone would do it. Then the fruit wouldn't just be less sweet, someone would have already eaten it. Perfectionism is a vice. In the winter of 1931, Martha Graham was hopelessly bogged down in a dance series she had choreographed called Ceremonials, inspired by Mayan and Aztec cultures. A notorious perfectionist, she despaired of ever completing the dance. Worried, self-critical, consumed by guilt that she had wasted her Guggenheim fellowship, Graham was convinced she could not meet the expectations of her rising reputation, much less the vision she had in her own head. The winter is lost, she whimpered in self-pity. The whole winter's work is lost. I've destroyed my year. This work is no good. Even though her dancers loved it, even though they had committed body and soul to it, all she could see was what needed to be changed. All she could see were the ways it wasn't perfect. And it trapped her in a kind of creative prison. It's the tragic fate of greats across many different fields. Their success is built on their incredibly high standards, often higher than anyone, including the audience or the market, could demand. But this virtue is also a terrible vice, not just preventing them from enjoying what they have achieved, but making it increasingly impossible to ship the next thing. Because it's never good enough. Because there's always more they can do. Because it doesn't measure up to what they did last time. Da Vinci was like this, becoming almost serially incapable of finishing his paintings. Steve Jobs got stuck releasing the Macintosh before he was fired from Apple. A biographer of the novelist Ralph Ellison speaks of a perfectionism that was so clogging the man's arteries that, in one case, Ellison produced 40 drafts of a short statement about one of his own books, a book he had lived and breathed for decades and should have been able to hammer out in 40 minutes. The tragic result was that Ellison never published a follow-up to his masterpiece, Invisible Man, despite writing some 19 inches of futile manuscript pages over the years. What was it? Was it humility? An obsession with getting the little things right? No, those are the reassuring excuses we make for what is often a kind of narcissism and obsession. We're convinced everyone cares so much about what we're doing that we get stuck. We tell ourselves it's self-discipline when in fact, it's self-consciousness. As they say, another way to spell perfectionism is paralysis. An obsession with getting it perfect misses the forest for the trees. Because ultimately the biggest miss of all is failing to get your shot off. What you don't ship, what you're too afraid or strict to release, to try, is, by definition, a failure. It doesn't matter the cause, whether it was from procrastination or perfectionism, the result is the same. You didn't do it. The Stoics remind us, we can't abandon a pursuit because we despair of perfecting it. Not trying because you're not sure you can. When you're not sure whether everyone will love it, there's a word for that too, cowardice. We have to be brave enough to soldier on. To give it a shot. To take our turn. To step into the arena, even though we might well lose. We have to be strong enough to do this too. Martha Graham was lucky to have collaborators who pushed her when necessary and helped to rescue her from the excesses of her own exacting self-discipline. When she was trapped with ceremonies, her musical director, Louis Horst, stepped in and told her, one cannot always create on the same level. The Sixth Symphony followed the Fifth, but without the Sixth we could not have had the Seventh. One cannot know what one is leading into. Transitions are as important as achievements. Perfect is not just the enemy of the good, as they say, but it's the enemy of everything that might come after. If you get stuck, your potential does too. This is why finishing is itself an achievement, an act of monumental discipline that must happen. Of course, you'll want to keep tinkering, keep tweaking, keep running the problems over in your mind. But you need to be able to stop yourself, to say, finally, this is done. And if you can't do that on your own, if you have trouble with the last mile on your projects, or if you know you can fall prey to perfectionism, then do you have the self-discipline to find partners who can cut you off and balance you out? Martha was certainly successful enough to surround herself with sycophants and yes-men, but she didn't. She understood she needed moderating influences, wise advisors and trusted patrons. If she was to produce great work, as great as Ralph Ellison and Da Vinci were, as in command of their genius as they both were, they struggled with this. As Martha's biographer and dance partner, Agnes de Mille, explained about Louis, he was the only one who could discipline Martha herself into finishing her pieces, shaping them up and getting them ready for performance. He was quite practical about this. After giving her leeway for weeks, or even months, he would at last call a halt and demand decisions, which Martha, in her hysterical turmoils, did not always wish to make. The dances got done, not always finished, but done. Thanks to Louis, she wrote, there always was a first performance. And without a first performance, we know, there's never a chance of moving closer to that perfect asymptote we're all striving to reach. Do the hard thing first. There have been fewer quotes more misunderstood and misattributed than Nicholas Chamfort's suggestion that a man must swallow a toad every morning if he wishes to be sure of finding nothing still more disgusting before the day is over. Shortened and often credited to Mark Twain *, the idea is that if we eat the frog at the beginning of the day, it will be next to impossible for the day to get any worse. A more applicable interpretation of this idea was expressed by the poet and pacifist William Stafford's daily rule: do the hard things first. Don't wait. Don't tell yourself you'll warm up to it. Don't tell yourself you'll get this other stuff out of the way and then. No. Do it now. Do it first. That's called prioritization. Get it over with. That's called self-care. Remember, Toni Morrison didn't get up before dawn for some me time. The mornings weren't for catching up on the news or folding laundry. She had a short window and she used it to write, seizing the day while others weren't yet stirring. This wasn't easy. There were many days where she didn't want to. But when she followed through, when she did her pages quietly in the morning light, not only was she moving closer to her goal of becoming a great writer, she was, in another sense, giving herself me time. Because now the rest of the day was a bonus. By taking care of difficult business, she was taking care of herself. She had owned the morning she had eaten the frog, and now everything else was extra. Nothing else was harder than the battle she'd already won. Just as days are made of mornings, lives are made of days. To procrastinate at any time, day or night, young or old, to push it until later, is a loser's game. The one thing all fools have in common, Seneca wrote, is that they're always getting ready to live. They tell themselves they just need to get some things in place first, that they're just not feeling it yet, that they'll get to it after. What, exactly? Exactly nothing. They never get to it. We never do. You'll need to be smarter than that, more disciplined than that. I ceaselessly chant the refrain, Montaigne said, anything you can do another day can be done now. He who postpones the hour of living right, Horace wrote, is like the rustic who waits for the river to run out before he crosses. To paraphrase the Stoics, you could be good now. Instead you chose tomorrow. To procrastinate is to be entitled. It is arrogant. It assumes there will be a later. It assumes you'll have the discipline to get to it later. Despite not having the discipline now. The graveyard of lost potential, we might say, is filled with people who just needed to do something else first. The time to do it is now. The time to get started is now. The thing to start with is the hard part, the part you want to do the least. Not begrudgingly, but promptly and enthusiastically, with a body that's been trained for hard work and a mind that's sharp and focused. Fools are too weak, too scared, too ill-disciplined for this, which is a problem for them but an opportunity for you. Because it's here that you'll win. They'll be delaying, you'll be pulling ahead. But only if you start now. Can you get back up? In 1959, Floyd Patterson put his title on the line to fight Ingemar Johansson. Although he trained hard for the fight, there was something missing in Patterson's camp as the day approached. Maybe it was hunger. Maybe it was commitment. Patterson was bored. He was impatient. He was overconfident. And when he got in the ring, it showed. He was not the man who deserved to win. Every fighter should be a little afraid of what could happen to him, Patterson would reflect on the fight later, because fear makes your mind sharper. When you have nothing to fear, your mind becomes dull. But he didn't think he could lose, and you could see he wasn't sharp. In the third round, he went down 7 times. The fight was finally stopped. The horrible words came to him as the fog from the punches cleared. I've lost the championship. Patterson couldn't believe it. But it was true. And more painfully still, it was all his fault. Now, this could have been the end of the story. In fact, for all of boxing history up to that point and almost every title fight since it was. Once a champion loses their belt, they never win it back. They're done. They're down. For the count. Patterson spent weeks moping, kicking himself. The guilt made him sick. He could barely sleep and or even look his children in the eye. He was knocked out. Then a letter arrived from Archie Moore, the boxer who Patterson had himself beaten to get the title. Dear Floyd, it said, I know how you must feel. I hope you don't continue to feel bad. The same thing has happened to many fighters. Of course, I hated to lose to you. And fate decreed it that way. Continuing, the letter broke down the fight and the obvious problems with Patterson's strategy, before concluding, if you concentrate your jab and move around this guy, you can be the first one to regain the crown. You can do it. Your friend, Archie Moore. It's worth taking a minute to recognize the incredible kindness as well as self-discipline it takes for a former champion to take the time to write, unsolicited, such encouragement to their arch-nemesis at their lowest moment. Moore could have taunted Patterson, instead. He helped him believe in himself. This moment of grace was exactly what Patterson, who was slipping into despair, so badly needed. His backslide was arrested. The pity party ended. He had been reminded of his agency. He could turn this into something. Training camp resumed. He willed himself to watch the film of his ignominious defeat, learning from each tortuous viewing. And then in June 1960, almost exactly a year later to the day, Floyd Patterson knocked out Ingemar Johansson. Midway through the 5th round, Floyd hit Johansson so hard the man took 5 minutes to regain consciousness in the middle of the ring. In 20 years of prize fighting, Patterson was the first ever, and only one of 4 since, to regain a heavyweight title, a powerful reminder that defeat is not final and that backslides can be stopped. We're all going to mess up. We'll show up to a life-changing opportunity unprepared. We'll fall off our diet or our sobriety. We'll lose our temper and embarrass ourselves. We'll make mistakes. We'll be beaten. That's the thing about discipline, it never fails us. But sometimes we fail it. But will that be the end of it? Is that who we are now? Or can we get back up? Losing is not always up to us, but being a loser is. Being a quitter is. Saying, what the hell, does it even matter? That's on us. Throwing in the towel on a fight we've clearly lost is one thing. Throwing in the towel on fighting, on your standards, from that point forward? Now you've been more than beaten, you've been defeated. Don't be frustrated that you are not constitutionally calm or perfect. Because no one is, and no one is expecting you to be. If your standards are so high that you give up when you fall short of them, then actually you don't have high standards. What you have are excuses. This is another reason why that perfectionism, moral or professional, is so dangerous. When we fall short, when we are revealed as the fundamentally flawed, vulnerable, beatable, screwed up people we are, it can be hard to get going again. If we're too hard on ourselves, as Floyd Patterson was, as Martha Graham was, we'll knock ourselves out of the fight entirely. We are all going to screw up. We're going to relapse on the diet, on the bad habit, whatever. We're going to blow it in public, not hustling like we should, giving in to temptation or a fit of passion. Perhaps even having a moment of cowardice. We are going to lose. Nobody stays undefeated for long in this life. And then what? Can we gather ourselves back up? Can we regroup and try again? It's wonderfully fitting that in both the Zen tradition and the Bible, we have a version of the proverb about falling down 7 times and getting up 8. It was also what Patterson literally did after that horrible 3rd round. The great home run hitter Sadaharu O used to say that for an athlete, losing just meant the opportunity come back tomorrow and try to do better. The same was true for winning too. That's what being a pro is about, treating winning or losing as a chance to get right back to it. To come back to your groove and stay in it, because that's where you're happiest, most in control, most connected. Even the most cheerful, even the strongest, even the most self-disciplined of us will stagger under the weight of our circumstances, or the consequences of our behavior. We remember Viktor Frankl today as an unflagging optimist, the unwavering believer in human meaning despite the horrors he endured in the Holocaust. And yet, there is a note he sent to some friends in 1945, just after the war ended, that read, "I am unspeakably tired, unspeakably sad, unspeakably lonely. In the camp, you really believed you had reached the low point of life, and then, when you came back, you were forced to see that things had not lasted, everything that had sustained you had been destroyed, that at the time when you have become human again, you could sink into an even more bottomless suffering." It's hard to blame him. It is also unfathomable to think of what humanity would have been deprived of if he had wallowed here, or, worse, given up. Instead, in spite of everything, he got back up. He said yes to life, to a second try, to getting back in the ring, to clawing his way back to happiness with purpose. If he can do it, after all that, we all can. Our self-discipline compels us to. Our destiny depends on it. The battle against pain. John F. Kennedy may have been born handsome and rich, but he was not dealt a good hand by the gods. He had a distant, imperious father and was born into a family with a history of addiction. His body was a source of continual trouble. From ulcers to Addison's disease to a degenerative back problem exacerbated first by football, then by war injuries, Kennedy was in almost constant pain. And his traumatic childhood and difficult job only added stress and tension on top. This was not his fault. Beyond frustrating, it was excruciating. He must have lain there in bed some mornings or other times on the floor, when he had fallen, and wondered if it was worth getting up. Yet one cannot help but read Kennedy's medical history and be terrified at the lengths he was willing to go for relief. As president, he took corticosteroids, procaine, Lamotil, testosterone, paregoric, phenobarbital, penicillin, amphetamines, and anything else he could get his hands on. He once told the British Prime Minister that if he didn't have sex constantly, he'd get migraines. When one doctor saw the injectable cocktail of amphetamines and painkillers Kennedy was taking, he tried to intervene. "I don't care if it's horse piss," Kennedy replied. "It works." Did it? Because Kennedy constantly needed more and more and more. He doctor shopped, allowing a parade of shady practitioners into his life, and the Oval Office, despite the warnings from people who knew better. Inevitably, the medications took their toll on Kennedy. He was still in pain. He became depressed. He felt like was trying to think through a fog. But instead of weaning himself off, he doubled down, getting a prescription for stilazine, an incredibly strong antipsychotic. History rightly celebrates Kennedy for his calm, wise temperance in the tense 13 days of the Cuban Missile Crisis, but a closer inspection shows us the daily danger his medical recklessness placed upon millions and millions of people. No president with his finger on the red button has any business taking stuff like that. A doctor warned him when he heard about the stilazine, threatening to go to the press if Kennedy didn't stop taking it immediately. That's the thing about both pain and pleasure, they're felt in the body, but they affect the mind and the mood, our temperament, which is something we must protect always. Are there acceptable drugs and treatments out there? Of course. No one should think that getting help for depression or for chronic pain is somehow contrary to the principles of temperance. Epictetus suffered all his life from a leg twisted and broken by torture. If there had been a safe way to moderate this pain, he'd have been stupid not to explore it. And we will find ourselves in positions like that. We'll have accidents. Our bodies will age. Our hearts will be broken. The problem is that Kennedy hoped a magic pill, or pills, would make his problems go away. He used sex and medicine as an escape, not as a tool. The pain wasn't his fault, but the bad decisions he made to get rid of it were. In fact, the one treatment that actually did something about his back pain was quite simple. The doctor who objected to Kennedy's drug use found that the president could not do a single sit-up. "You will be a cripple soon if you don't start exercising," he explained to Kennedy. 5 days a week. And you need to start now. With stretching and breathing exercises, weights, and then calisthenics. Kennedy regained much of his mobility. The pain levels dropped to something more manageable. "I wish I could have known you 10 years ago," Kennedy told the doctor. It looked like he'd even be able to stop using his back brace asterisk. While not every problem can be solved with fresh air and exercise, we must be very suspicious of anyone who tells us they can make our pain disappear without real work. Dr. Feelgoods, as one of Kennedy's doctors was called, are like sirens of Greek myth. Their song is sweet but often deadly. Yet generation after generation ignores this fact. Today, without irony, people, in considerably less pain physically at least, have popularized the phrase doing the work to describe their use of all sorts of experimental psychedelic drugs to address their spiritual or mental malaise. They say this even as a fentanyl epidemic ravages and kills those around them, as the world staggers from the consequences of an opioid crisis. Medicine is not something to play with. Pope John Paul II was right to remind us that part of temperance is about avoiding the impulse to deprive ourselves of consciousness by the use of drugs. Our rational faculties, as well as our bodies, can torture us, but they are also a gift. We ought not dull their power or mess, unnecessarily, with our chemistry. Doing the work. The work is getting through life sober. Go on a trip. Go to therapy. Struggle with it. Heal a little bit each day, get a little better each day. Perhaps that's why the path that Kennedy got on is so seductive. Believing that there is just some single thing that can unlock our relief, some soma-like pill or device that can save us from pain or boredom or despair. In fact, it's this very hope that makes us vulnerable to gurus or doctors who prey on people in agony. Anyone or anything that offers you an escape should be viewed with caution. And anything that promises euphoria is liable to give you real pain. Doing the work must actually mean thinking about things holistically. It must mean getting to the root causes. It should mean solving for the injury, not the symptoms. It means therapy in Kennedy's case, not just the physical therapy, but the desperate need for psychological help too. This will take real courage as well as self-discipline. Because it takes longer. Because it means facing scary things, because it means inching our way to progress, not instant transformation. This will not be easy. But the side effects are at least minimal. It may also mean, no matter how unfair or unpleasant it is, finding a way to live with pain. The Stoics had a word for this, to what must be tolerated. Lou Gehrig knew that a long career in baseball would require playing hurt, as life itself demands. I remember when Lou had a broken middle finger on his right hand, one teammate recalled. Every time he batted a ball it hurt him. And he almost got sick to his stomach when he caught the ball. You could see him wince. But he always stayed in the game. At 2,044 games, he was hit with a crippling case of lumbago, which sends sharp pains through the lower back and makes standing up straight a challenge. Would this be the end? I'll shake it off, Gehrig replied. That's what I've always done. He could have turned back to drink or worse. But he didn't. He stayed clean. He stayed in the game. But pain can also be an indicator, a warning light, a reminder to slow down or make a change. That's why Greg Popovich was willing to take the fine for resting his players better financial pain than painful injuries and painkillers. For too long, Kennedy wasn't interested in fixing what was wrong, only in finding a way to continue his affairs, his youth, his denial of his limitations despite the danger. His body tried to warn him. His doctors tried to warn him. He ignored them. Queen Elizabeth is as tough as they get. But you don't make it that long without listening to your body, without taking care of yourself. She's relied on sustainable practices, not shortcuts. As she advised a young wife of a diplomat who ached after the long days of standing without break, one must plant their feet like this. Always. Keep them parallel. Make sure your weight is evenly distributed. That's all there is to it. There's more to it, of course, but it's a start. We endure pain, but we also have to address the root causes of it. The mind and the body must find a way to work together. Temperately, moderately, soberly. The battle against pleasure. Epicurus was supposedly a pleasure-addicted hedonist. The inscription above the man's garden does lend itself to that impression. Stranger, here you will do well to tarry, it said, here our highest good is pleasure. The caretaker of that abode, a kindly host, will be ready for you, he will welcome you with bread, and serve you water also in abundance, with these words, have you not been well entertained? This garden does not whet your appetite, but quenches it. What kind of pleasure was he promising? Food? Sex? Drink? Debauchery? Few people in 3rd century BC Athens were sure, so they assumed the worst. Here, thousands of years later, we perpetuate their suspicions, loosely defining an Epicurean as a person who indulges every sensual urge. Anyone who actually reads Epicurus's philosophy, though, finds a much simpler prescription for happiness. In one famous letter, Epicurus, talking to a rich friend who promised him anything he wanted, requested a small pot of cheese with which to treat himself. Such was the man, wrote the ancient biographer Diogenes Laertius, who laid down that pleasure was the end of life. To Epicurus, pleasure was not gluttony. It was not mindlessly giving the body whatever it ached for. By pleasure, Epicurus said, we mean the absence of pain in the body and of trouble in the mind. It is not an unbroken succession of drinking bouts and of merry-making, not the satisfaction of lusts, not the enjoyment of the fish and other delicacies of a luxurious table, which produce a pleasant life. It is sober reasoning, searching out the motives of every choice and avoidance, and banishing those beliefs through which the greatest disturbances take possession of the soul. Epicurus was no King George IV, nor would he have wanted to be, as it was not particularly pleasurable to be King George. Not only did the man's gluttony cut his life short, but allowing himself everything he wanted turned quite quickly into a daily nightmare. How much fun was Babe Ruth having when they had to rush him to the hospital stuffed sick with food and booze? We don't refrain from excess because it's a sin. We are self-disciplined because we want to avoid a hellish existence right here, while we're alive, a hell of our own making. The body is stupid, you have to understand, and our temperament has to save it from itself. The body wants to eat until it is full, but it ends up way past that point. The body wants to drink until it is drunk, but we only feel that way when we're well beyond drunk. The body wants to be numb, it can put up with horse piss if it works, as Kennedy said. The body wants what it wants now, it can deal with the consequences later. We have to be smart and self-controlled and self-aware enough to intervene before that happens. And for eating more than we should, you can insert just about anything we are prone to take to excess, from drinking to working to having fun to staying up late. As Timotheus, the Athenian statesman, once said after a delightful party at Plato's house, your dinners are enjoyable not only when one is eating them but on the morning after as well. If you're stuffed and uncomfortable afterward, if you're hungover and groggy when you wake up, if you're filled with regret or shame, or you don't even remember what happened the night before, was it really that great in the first place? The Stoics said that this was a perfect metaphor for everything we do. Remember to conduct yourself in life as if at a banquet. Epictetus said, as something being passed around comes to you, reach out your hand and take a moderate helping. Does it pass you by? Don't stop it. It hasn't yet come. Don't burn in desire for it, but wait until it arrives in front of you. Act this way with children, a spouse, toward position, with wealth. One day it will make you worthy of a banquet with the gods. Asterisk. Always remember, Churchill once reassured his wife, that I have taken more out of alcohol than alcohol has taken out of me. This is a critical test. Don't just think about what a certain pleasure will give, think about what it will take out of you. Think about how what you're chasing is going to age. Think about how you'll think about it after, during the refractory period, during your hangover, when your pants are too tight, when you catch yourself in the mirror months from now and wonder how this happened. Of course, abstinence and restraint are not the same thing. One is about avoidance, the other is about responsibility. It's understanding how to do these things appropriately for your body, for your genetics, for your lifestyle. Temperance, C.S. Lewis reminds us, is about going to the right length and no further. As Musonius Rufus reminds us, that by the standard of pleasure, nothing is more pleasant than self-control, and nothing is more painful than lack of self-control. Nobody who has given themselves over to excess is having a good time. No one enslaved to their appetites is free. The ability to rise from the table before the point of hating yourself, before the meat sweats or the carb coma, this takes strength. So does nursing one drink through dinner instead of going back for more, or stopping only at the signs of impairment. And so is knowing, finally, that a bigger house isn't going to make you happier. That you don't need more money, more fans, more anything. Never approaching, let alone passing, the point of regret while still enjoying things that are fun, that make you happy, that give you pleasure. Recognizing that your choices have put you in a dangerous fog, as Kennedy couldn't do. This takes self-knowledge, self-control, and if the people around you seem ready to keep the party going, no small amount of courage. Discipline is not a punishment, it's a way to avoid punishment. We do it because we love ourselves, we value ourselves and what we do. And we find, conveniently enough, that it also heightens our enjoyment of things as well. Indeed, the person content with less, who can enjoy a small pot of cheese as if it were a culinary bounty, is much more easily satisfied and much better able to find good in all situations. Seek yourself, not distraction. Be happy, not hedonistic. Let the mind rule, not the body. Conquer pleasure, make yourself superior to pain. Fight the provocation. Arthur Ashe's father was working one day as a driver for William Thalheimer, a wealthy Jewish man in Richmond, Virginia, who owned a chain of department stores. Taking his boss across town to see about a piece of real estate he wanted to buy, Arthur Ashe Sr. was given a first-hand look at the kind of discrimination that Jews also faced in the unreconstructed South in the 1950s. Throughout the negotiation, Thalheimer was insulted, condescended to, and bullied by a man who seemed to be particularly disgusted at the thought of doing business with a Jew. Quietly enduring it, Thalheimer completed the transaction and he and Ashe Sr. got back in the car to drive home. Why? Ashe couldn't help but ask. Why did you put up with all that? I came out here to purchase that piece of land, Thalheimer explained. I got the piece of land. It belongs to me now, not to him. That man can go on cursing me as long as he likes. I have that land. Of course, he had wanted to slam his fist in the man's face, but that would have given the anti-Semite exactly what he wanted, right? To not have to do business with a Jew? And where would that have left Thalheimer? Without the land he wanted. Quite possibly in jail. With the distance afforded by the passage of time, we can appreciate both the injustice of what occurred and marvel at the quiet dignity and self-control exhibited by Thalheimer in this moment. Certainly Ashe Sr., a black man in the segregated South, would have acutely appreciated both things. In fact, his son, Arthur Ashe Jr., would note that it was this experience that shaped his father as a provider and inspired him, during segregation, to always be pragmatic as well as patient and self-contained. Ashe Sr. didn't care what people said about him or did to him. What mattered was supporting his family and setting his two sons up for success in a world that seemed very much intent on them not being successful. Racists be damned, Arthur Ashe Sr. was going to get that land. Obviously, it would be wonderful if this didn't have to happen. If no one was ever subjected to slurs or discrimination, if everyone were kind to us, if we were never deprived, judged, assaulted, or treated shabbily. But that is not life. There is a story about Cato the Younger, the great-grandson of the frugal Roman Cato the Elder, who was visiting the baths in Rome. One day, when he was bumped and then struck in one of those random encounters that seem to combust into a full-on fight when you come across somebody who is just having a bad day. But once the scuffle had broken up and Cato could collect himself, he simply refused to accept an apology from the offender, though not in the way one might expect. I don't even remember being hit, he said. Beyond refusing the apology, he declined to carry a grudge too. James Peck, one of the only white freedom riders, would note several times how his refusal to retaliate would stun his attackers into a momentary lull and, one might imagine, a terrifying moment of self-reflection. Why isn't this person consumed with hatred like I am? Why aren't they out of control like me? Are they actually better than me? Remember always, as wrong as they are, as annoying as it is, it takes two for a real conflict to happen. As the Stoics said, when we are offended, when we fight, we are complicit. We have chosen to engage. We have traded self-control for self-indulgence. We've allowed our cooler head to turn hot even though we know hot heads rarely make good decisions. Life people, they're going to give you the opportunity. You can decline to accept it. Aesop's old fable about the lion buzzed about and stung by a gnat. We have to develop the ability to ignore, to endure, to forget. Not just cruel provocations from jerks, but also unintentional slights and mistakes from people we love or respect, lest we do more damage to ourselves than the sting of those slights ever could. It helps to be a little deaf, was the advice that Ruth Bader Ginsburg was given by her mother-in-law, and it helped guide her through not just 56 years of marriage, but also a 27-year career on the Supreme Court with colleagues she adored but surely disagreed with on a regular basis, not least of whom was Antonin Scalia, her best friend and ideological opposite. Think of what Ginsburg and Ashe Sr. and Thalheimer had to endure during periods in history when laws and social mores were almost never on their side. And you're struggling not to freak out in response to what is literally called a microaggression? We can pretend to not see it. We can ignore what they said about us on the email chain to which we were CC'd. We don't have to assume the worst. We don't have to turn the buzzing gnat into a national referendum. We don't have to let it rattle us. Why should you have to, though? Because you have work to do. They want you to get upset. Because if you're going to stop and reply to every attack, as Lincoln said, you might as well admit defeat right now. You'll never get anything done. You'll certainly never be happy. And they'll have won. It's the easiest thing in the world to respond to intemperance with intemperance. We have to remember, someone else's lack of self-control is not a justification for abandoning our own. Nor is it a good look or a recipe for success and achievement. Arthur Ashe Jr. learned that self-control from his father, which he, in turn, had seen so powerfully embodied in William Thalheimer. his destiny as a tennis player as your own destiny will be was reached by chance. Beware this madness. In Game 7 of the 2004 Western Conference semifinals, Sam Cassell hit an incredible shot from the corner to give the Minnesota Timberwolves a 2-point lead. It was one of those shots that only the best athletes can possibly hope to make, under the kind of pressure that very few will ever possibly know. Which is why the cameras and the crowd loved what happened next, as Cassell transitioned back on defense, carried away with excitement and pride, his arms hanging down between his legs like a cradle, he took triumphant, pounding strides, motioning as if he was straining to carry his enormous testicles. It also happened that, in the midst of this famous big balls dance, Cassell created a small avulsion fracture in his hip. As a result, the Timberwolves, the number 1 seed with home court advantage throughout the playoffs, fell to the Lakers in the conference finals in 6 games. Cassell, limited by the injury, was barely a factor. Of course, in the calm and mild light of hindsight, no one would trade an NBA championship for a few seconds of celebration or taunting, but that's the thing about a fit of passion. It blinds us. It carries us away. It overrides our judgment. It makes it impossible to be patient, to bite our tongue, to resist temptation, to ignore a slight. Oh, what this costs us. Oh, what we come to regret. Sometimes it's a moment of arrogance or excitement, or anger, or anxiety, or avarice, or envy, or lust. Think of the powerful men and women whose careers were derailed by a sex scandal. They had power, they had influence, the future was bright. What would possess them to risk it all for some fleeting pleasure? Why would someone as brave and decent as Martin Luther King Jr. cheat on his wife in those squalid hotel rooms? The philosopher Democritus wasn't wrong when he described sex as a mild madness. It makes us crazy. It makes us do shameful things. Anger is just a slightly less mild form of madness. Whom the gods destroy, they first make mad, said another philosopher. Lincoln's famous hot letters were the things he wrote in anger but was disciplined enough to send to a drawer in his desk and not the deserving recipient. On the other hand, the most pointless scandals of Truman's presidency were the mean notes he sent, including one to a critic at the New York Times who had written negatively about his daughter. A generally self-disciplined president, these missives, these uninhibited blasts of passion, were uncharacteristic. Alas, anger got the best of one of the best of us. Nearly every regret, every mistake, every embarrassing moment, whether it be personal or professional or historical, have one thing in common: somebody lost control of their emotions. Somebody got carried away. Somebody was scared, or defensive. Somebody wasn't thinking beyond the next few seconds asterisk. That's the irony of our obsession with talking so positively about passion these days. The ancients had precisely the opposite view of the word. The passions were considered very dangerous. Something to beware of. Because even when they were positive, which they often were not, they tended to lead us astray. To hijack our minds or our bodies, and sometimes both. We codify this even into our legal system, referring to crimes of passion. If you cannot rein in your impulses now, if you can be jerked like a puppet today, how do you think it will go when you reach the level you aspire to? When you have power, when you have people willing to make excuses for you, when you have resources. And, 2, when the margin for error is also much smaller. People who are doing less important things than you can get away with not being in control. You can't afford for a moment of ego or excitement costing yourself and your teammates a championship. You can't afford for an impulse decision to undermine your training. You can't afford to let passion block out the calm and mild light. Maybe other people can. Not you. Does that mean you never get to be spontaneous or to let out your emotions? Of course not. Love and be loved, feel passion. The idea is to stop yourself from saying something cruel to that person you love when you're upset, or betray the trust of the person you love because of a few seconds of temptation. You can get angry. The important thing is not to do anything out of anger. And for anger we can plug in so many other emotions we feel passionately in the moment. John Wooden tried to keep the passion on his team to a minimum. He found it to be an unsustainable and dangerous fuel. I wanted them bristling with intensity, finely focused, and in control of themselves, he said. When these attitudes are combined with talent and good teaching, you may find yourself leading a team, competing and prevailing at the highest levels. This will not occur if you are a slave to passion. Of all the bad habits to quit, passion is the hardest one. Because it happens in bursts. Because it's such powerful and combustible fuel. Because before we even recognize we're in the sway of it, the damage is done. We can have passion, but no one can afford to be a slave to it. The key is to slow things down. Think things through. Try not to be driven by forces you don't understand or control. Just as an addict looks for the warning signs of a craving, we must look for insertion points for our self-discipline before we get carried away. Whether it's anxiety or aggression, lust for a person or a thing, a celebration or an overwhelming uncertainty, we must step in and pull the emergency brake before the urge to act on those emotions picks up so much steam that it crashes us into a wall. Always take the exit ramp when it presents itself. There's a story about Queen Elizabeth, who, after a long day of travel with her late husband, Prince Philip, found him worked up and in an argument. The Queen, saving him from himself, caught her husband's attention and pointed out the display in front of them. "Look at the pottery," she said calmly and slowly. Shaken out of his fit, Philip stopped and looked, bringing himself back to a state of royal dignity. Later, a politician who had overheard the exchange would walk over to the scene where it had occurred. He was only half surprised to find there had never been any pottery at all. When you've planned a thing that's wrong, as the famous Mr. Rogers lyric goes, you must stop and do something else instead. When you see someone about to give themselves over to a fit of passion, see if you can't help them redirect that energy. Because we're in charge. Our training, our teaching, our talent, our good temperament. They are our guide. They take the lead. Not our passions. Not the momentary mild, or not so mild, madness. Silence is strength. It's so easy to marvel at the courage of the Spartans that we often miss their other feats of strength. Told that Xerxes' arrows would blot out the sun, Leonidas replied, "Then we shall fight in the shade." Told by another conqueror that if his army breached their walls, he'd slaughter every single soldier, the Spartans replied with one word, "If." Obviously these retorts made in the face of death took real cojones. It's also unquestionable that the Spartans' laconic style, which is named after them, is part and parcel of their culture of self-discipline. They never used two words where one would do. They never said more than was necessary, never shot off at the mouth, never overshared, never droned on or bloviated. As Archimedes once explained at a Spartan dinner, an expert on speaking also knows when not to do so. The Spartans kept their tongues in check, even when it meant that some people might think less of them. In a big argument, one Spartan listened but said nothing. "Are you stupid?" someone asked. "Well, certainly a stupid person wouldn't be able to keep quiet," he replied. And of one famous Spartan it was said that it was impossible to find a man who knew more but spoke less. Robert Greene puts it perfectly, powerful people impress and intimidate by saying less. The irony, of course, is that with power comes license to say whatever you want, whenever you want, to whomever you want. And yet, it is the discipline to not do these things that creates the presence that powerful people enjoy. It isn't easy to do. Especially today. Not only does the ego want to talk, want to say what it thinks, but now we have technology that exploits ego and explicitly tempts you to share, to speak, to get in pointless arguments, to burst out with hot takes. Online or in person, we can't just sit there. We jump in because we think we're supposed to. We jump in because we don't want to seem dumb, even though by speaking we risk removing all doubt. We jump in because we just can't live with someone else being wrong and not knowing it. Where does this get us? Usually into trouble. Rarely does it make any sort of positive difference. Never does it help us with our main thing. It's almost always a distraction from that main thing. Can you keep a secret? Bite your tongue about someone or something you dislike? Get someone else to deliver the news? Put up with being misunderstood? It's a balance. While each of us needs to cultivate the courage to speak up and speak the truth, we also need to develop the self-discipline to know when to stay focused and when to shut up, and how to measure what we do say with the utmost economy. You don't have to verbalize every thought. You don't have to always give your opinion, especially when it's not solicited. Just because there is a pause doesn't mean you have to fill it. Just because everyone else is talking doesn't mean you have to jump in. You can sit with the awkwardness. You can use the silence to your advantage. You can wait and see. You can decide not to speak through words at all and let your work speak for you. Angela Merkel famously uses almost no adjectives in her speeches, but when she speaks, you listen, because you know that every word is there for a reason. Cato chose to speak only when he was certain that his words weren't better left unsaid. Better to be thought foolish or simple than to make a fool of yourself to prove that you don't actually have anything to say. Regret what you didn't say, not the other way around. To be imprecise with language, to fall prey to what they now call semantic creep, exaggerating and misusing important words until they have no meaning. This is the mark of not just a sloppy thinker, but a bad temperament. When you talk, it should matter. When you say something, it should mean something. Remember, free speech is a right, not an obligation. 2 ears, 1 mouth, Zeno would remind his students. Respect that ratio properly. Let them wish you talked more. Let them wonder what you're thinking. Let the words you speak carry extra weight precisely because they are rare. You can answer the question with, I don't know. You can ignore the insult. You can decline the invitation. You can decide not to explain your reasons. You can allow for a pause. You can put it down in your journal instead. You can listen. You can sit with the silence. You can let your actions do the talking. You can listen more than you talk. You can speak only when you're certain it's not better left unsaid. Of course, you can. But will you? Hold your fire. How badly Churchill must have wanted to attack. A lifetime of pushing, as he had once described his ambition to lead and be at the center of things, was now intersecting with years of warnings about the menace of Nazism. Churchill had been out of power for a decade. He had been hoping, dreaming, scheming for this moment. Now it was his. The Germans had overrun the French in the early summer of 1940, and now the French leadership were pleading with the British to throw the Royal Air Force into the mix. Italy, sensing French defeat, had just joined the fight and declared war on both of them. A world war had arrived. Here is the decisive point. Maxime Weygand, the supreme commander of all the French forces, pleaded with Churchill at a meeting outside Paris. They were down to their last quarter of an hour. The British ought not to keep a single fighter in England, Churchill heard him say. They should all be sent to France. To a man of boldness and daring, a man who had predicted this terrible scenario, newly ensconced with all the power of a prime minister, this must have been an urgent and momentous opportunity. Would he rush into the fray? No, he would not. This is not the decisive point, Churchill replied, after pausing to reflect, balancing courage and self-discipline and his foreboding sense of a long, hard road ahead of them. This is not the decisive moment. The decisive moment will come when Hitler hurls his Luftwaffe against Britain. If we can keep the command of the air over our island, that is all I ask, then we will win it all back for you. Whatever happens here, we are resolved to fight on forever and ever and ever. Almost every part of him must have wanted to say yes. All the pressure was directed at him to do it. Millions of lives hung in the balance, and untold destruction too. And yet, he gathered up the quiet fortitude to rebuff an ally, to deny them what must have felt like their last and only hope, and to save his planes for the Battle of Britain, a decision that history proved more than correct. Could you have done this? Can you trust yourself enough to stand alone? Can you stoically endure the criticism and the questioning to persist in what you know is right? Even at great cost? A leader who cannot do this well, they're not a leader. They're a follower. At nearly every juncture of the war, Churchill was provoked. There was always the impulse, the pressure to do something. From his allies. From the British people. From the enemy. Yet success, as most strategy does, depended on judicious restraint. In 1942 and 1943, pressure built for an Allied landing in Europe, opening the so-called Second Front against the Germans. Again, Churchill resisted, taking one American diplomat on a midnight tour of Parliament, which had already been heavily bombed. Churchill explained why he had to oppose rushing in. "When I look across the well of this house," he said, "I see the faces that should be here. I'm just a sport because my contemporaries are dead. They're dead at the Passchendaele or the Somme. And we can't endure the decimation of another British generation." Politically, supporting an invasion was the easier thing. The troops wanted it. The people wanted it. But Churchill was haunted by visions of dead British soldiers floating in the surf of France's beaches, stuck face down in the muck of Belgium's wetlands. He knew they would get only one chance to land on the continent. This wasn't something that could be botched. He held off the forceful entreaties from his allies for nearly 2 full years, not because he was afraid to fight but because he knew his troops needed more time to practice and prepare. In fact, that's what the landings in Italy in September 1943 would prove, both of which were costly demonstrations of and priceless training for how difficult a successful invasion of France would be. On June 6, 1944, the Allies landed at Normandy, with the British Second Army, including more than 60,000 troops, leading the entire eastern flank of the invasion. This was it. With intense focus and remarkable self-discipline, Churchill had done more than wait for the right moment. He had made the moment right. Our drive prods us. FOMO dogs us. Doubts torture us. Everyone else has already jumped in. What if we miss our moment to resist? This pressure requires real mental discipline. Sometimes we have to raise our hand, not to give the signal to go ahead, but to wait for it. Wait for the absolute bottom, or top, of the market, even as everyone shouts that you're crazy, that you're stupid, but you know it's not quite time. Wait for the perfect job for your talents, as you turn down the promotion or hold out in contract negotiations to get what you know you're actually worth. Wait until you see the whites of their eyes. Resist the bait your competitor is putting in front of you, luring them into a trap of your own. Resist the temptation to interrupt your opponent as they hang themselves. Put the time in on something classic or transgressive or shatteringly bold, even as you miss out on capitalizing on present trends that everyone insists are the future. Rest early in the season as the Spurs did, so you can peak at the exact right moment. Wait for your reserves so you can mount an attack that will actually succeed. There is an old idea that goes all the way back to the Stoics but was wonderfully expressed by the English poet John Dryden. Beware the fury of the patient man. It was hard for Churchill precisely because he was furious. He was a doer. He had his back against the wall. But instead, through the calm and mild light of strategic brilliance, he waited. He held his fire. And when he did take his shot, it blew the target apart. This isn't lying to yourself about how someday, hopefully, maybe, you'll do something. No, you've decided to act. Now you've got the harder hurdle to clear, holding on. Taking the hits while you do so. While you move with deliberateness, to get it right and make it count. Will you? In life, in war, in business, we often only get one moment, one opportunity. Nobody is going to give you a do-over. You never get to go back and try it differently to make up for deficiencies in preparation, to time things better, to get more leverage. One shot. Are we strong enough to wait for it? Can we discipline those nerves? Can we make it count? Yes. Yes, we can. We must. Now it was his. The Germans had overrun the French in the early summer of 1940, and now the French leadership were pleading with the British to throw the Royal Air Force into the mix. Italy, sensing French defeat, had just joined the fight and declared war on both of them. A world war had arrived. Here is the decisive point. Maxime Weygand, the supreme commander of all the French forces, pleaded with Churchill at a meeting outside Paris. They were down to their last quarter of an hour. The British ought not to keep a single fighter in England, Churchill heard him say. They should all be sent to France. To a man of boldness and daring, a man who had predicted this terrible scenario, newly ensconced with all the power of a prime minister, this must have been an urgent and momentous opportunity. Would he rush into the fray? No, he would not. This is not the decisive point, Churchill replied, after pausing to reflect, balancing courage and self-discipline and his foreboding sense of a long, hard road ahead of them. This is not the decisive moment. The decisive moment will come when Hitler hurls his Luftwaffe against Britain. If we can keep the command of the air over our island, that is all I ask, then we will win it all back for you. Whatever happens here, we are resolved to fight on forever and ever and ever. Almost every part of him must have wanted to say yes. All the pressure was directed at him to do it. Millions of lives hung in the balance, and untold destruction too. And yet, he gathered up the quiet fortitude to rebuff an ally, to deny them what must have felt like their last and only hope, and to save his planes for the Battle of Britain, a decision that history proved more than correct. Could you have done this? Can you trust yourself enough to stand alone? Can you stoically endure the criticism and the questioning, to persist in what you know is right, even at great cost? A leader who cannot do this, well, they're not a leader. They're a follower. At nearly every juncture of the war, Churchill was provoked. There was always the impulse, the pressure to do something. From his allies. From the British people. From the enemy. Yet success, as most strategy does, depended on judicious restraint. In 1942 and 1943, pressure built for an Allied landing in Europe, opening the so-called Second Front against the Germans. Again, Churchill resisted. Taking one American diplomat on a midnight tour of Parliament, which had already been heavily bombed, Churchill explained why he had to oppose rushing in. When I look across the well of this house, he said, I see the faces that should be here. I'm just a sport because my contemporaries are dead. They're dead at the Passchendaele or the Somme. And we can't endure the decimation of another British generation. Politically, supporting an invasion was the easier thing. The troops wanted it. The people wanted it. But Churchill was haunted by visions of dead British soldiers floating in the surf of France's beaches, stuck face down in the muck of Belgium's wetlands. He knew they would get only one chance to land on the continent. This wasn't something that could be botched. He held off the forceful entreaties from his allies for nearly 2 full years, not because he was afraid to fight, but because he knew his troops needed more time to practice and prepare. In fact, that's what the landings in Italy in September 1943 would prove, both of which were costly demonstrations of and priceless training for how difficult a successful invasion of France would be. On June 6, 1944, the Allies landed at Normandy, with the British Second Army, including more than 60,000 troops, leading the entire eastern flank of the invasion. This was it. With intense focus and remarkable self-discipline, Churchill had done more than wait for the right moment. He had made the moment right. Our drive prods us. FOMO dogs us. Doubts torture us. Everyone else has already jumped in. What if we miss our moment? To resist this pressure requires real mental discipline. Sometimes we have to raise our hand, not to give the signal to go ahead, but to wait. Wait for it asterisk. Wait for the absolute bottom, or top, of the market, even as everyone shouts that you're crazy, that you're stupid, but you know it's not quite time. Wait for the perfect job for your talents, as you turn down the promotion or hold out in contract negotiations to get what you know you're actually worth. Wait until you see the whites of their eyes. Resist the bait your competitor is putting in front of you, luring them into a trap of your own. Resist the temptation to interrupt your opponent as they hang themselves. Put the time in on something classic or transgressive or shatteringly bold, even as you miss out on capitalizing on present trends that everyone insists are the future. Rest early in the season as the Spurs did, so you can peak at the exact right moment. Wait for your reserves so you can mount an attack that will actually succeed. There is an old idea that goes all the way back to the Stoics but was wonderfully expressed by the English poet John Dryden. Beware the fury of the patient man. It was hard for Churchill precisely because he was furious. He was a doer. He had his back against the wall. But instead, through the calm and mild light of strategic brilliance, he waited. He held his fire. And when he did take his shot, it blew the target apart. This isn't lying to yourself about how someday, hopefully, maybe, you'll do something. No, you've decided to act. Now you've got the harder hurdle to clear, holding on. Taking the hits while you do so. While you move with deliberateness, to get it right and make it count. Will you? In life, in war, in business, we often only get one moment, one opportunity. Nobody is going to give you a do-over. You never get to go back and try it differently to make up for deficiencies in preparation, to time things better, to get more leverage. One shot. Are we strong enough to wait for it? Can we discipline those nerves? Can we make it count? Yes. Yes, we can. We must. Temper your ambition. In 1791, a young Napoleon entered an essay contest with the hopes of winning its 1,200 franc prize. The prompt was a powerful one: what are the most important truths and feelings for men to learn to be happy? The essay took him 6 months to write, and he did not win, but at age 22, in his youthful excitement, he put down as good a warning about insatiable ambition as there ever was. What is Alexander the Great doing when he rushes from Thebes into Persia and thence into India? He is ever restless, he loses his wits, he believes himself God, the future conqueror would write. What is the end of Cromwell? He governs England. But is he not tormented by all the daggers of the Furies? Damning illustrations of the heights of intemperance. And if that weren't enough, Napoleon then moves in for the coup de grace, with a pronouncement whose meaning is unmistakable. Ambition, which overthrows governments and private fortunes, which feeds on blood and crimes, ambition is, like all inordinate passions, a violent and unthinking fever that ceases only when life ceases, like a conflagration which, fanned by a pitiless wind, ends only after all has been consumed. If only the adult Napoleon had been reminded of these words during those turbulent, destructive years when he named himself Emperor of the French and mandated pompous titles like Monseigneur, Altesse Serenissime, Serene Highness, and Excellence for himself, while placing his incompetent relatives on thrones across Europe. If only someone could have reminded him of his own feelings about the perils of unchecked ambition. Asterisk. But wait, someone actually did. In the early 1800s, Talleyrand, his foreign minister, dug up the essay in the archives and gave it to Napoleon as both a gift and a warning, which His Imperial and Royal Majesty, yet another title he gave himself, refused to accept as either. The author deserved to be whipped, Napoleon said of his younger self. What ridiculous things I said, and how annoyed I would be if they were preserved, he exclaimed as he threw what he thought was the only copy into a fire. A short time later, he would once again litter the continent with a generation of bodies and find himself exiled to a rock in the ocean, where he could do no more damage to humanity. For much of history, Alexander was the cautionary tale for unfettered ambition. Sure, he was brilliant. Sure, he accomplished incredible things. But where did it leave him? Empty. Alone. Unhappy. He found himself taunting his own men when they finally realized he would never be satisfied. Go tell your countrymen That you left Alexander completing the conquest of the world. Except he died almost immediately after, and his empire collapsed with him. The poet Juvenal remarked that the whole world had not been big enough to contain Alexander, but in the end, a coffin was sufficient. And what had it all been for? Like Napoleon, it hadn't been about his people or about a cause. He had waged wars of offense and aggression entirely for himself. This was a pathological need to achieve, for which the consequences were ultimately borne by basically everyone else. There is a considerable amount of self-discipline required to quit bad habits, particularly the more gluttonous ones. But of all the addictions in the world, the most intoxicating and the hardest to control is ambition. Because unlike drinking, society rewards it. We look up to the successful. We don't ask them what they are doing or why they are doing it, we only ask them how they do it. We conveniently ignore how little satisfaction their accomplishments bring them, how miserable most of them are, and how miserable they tend to make everyone around them in turn. Seneca, a man whose ambition got him into trouble like Napoleon, would say of a ruthless general named Marius, the Napoleon of his time, that while Marius commanded armies, ambition commanded Marius. He lamented the leaders and business people and conquerors who disrupted and disturbed the world, while they themselves were disturbed and disrupted. Marius and Napoleon and Alexander were powerful but ultimately powerless. Because they couldn't stop. Because there was never enough. They lusted for control over millions, because they lacked control over themselves. Just as we do with our relationship to drugs or devices, we have to ask ourselves, who is in charge? Our mind? Or our slavish need to be the biggest, the winningest, the richest, the most powerful, the most famous? The need to do more, to get more, to achieve again and again. We have to ask, what is this really bringing me? What am I actually getting out of it? Did Napoleon's accomplishments make him happy? Power and wealth didn't even make him secure. Besides the guilt and shame, which he clearly deserved, he died alone on his second island in the middle of the ocean. Now, this criticism doesn't mean that all accomplishments are to be scorned. What would the world look like if nobody tried to do anything? If nobody pushed to get better or do more? If we didn't have ambition, some big goal we are after, how would we know what little things, what distractions, to say no to? Ambition is good, it just must be tempered. Like all elements of self-discipline, it's about balance. The monk or the priest who tries to reduce their needs to nothing, who rejects everyone and everything in pursuit of spiritual perfection, is not all that dissimilar to the billionaire who keeps building and building, or the quarterback who can't even consider retiring. At the same time, the person who dreams of nothing, who believes in nothing, who tries nothing, well, that's not really the point either. What we're talking about here is really temperament. We must have a sense of self and worth that can check our ceaseless ambition before it o'erleaps itself, as Shakespeare warned. Without the brake that prevents us from getting carried away, ambition not only deprives us of happiness, but it can very well destroy us and harm others, as the insatiable conquerors invariably do, whether it's innocent victims of the wars they wage, the people they use and discard on the way up the ladder, family they neglect in the process, or the countless imitators they inspire. We don't need accomplishments to feel good or to be good enough. What do we need? The truth, not much. Some food and water. Work that we can challenge ourselves with. A calm mind in the midst of adversity. Sleep. A solid routine. A cause we are committed to. Something we're getting better at. Everything else is extra. Or worse, as history has shown countless times, the source of our painful downfall. Money is a dangerous tool. Babe Ruth made more money as an athlete than a person could have reasonably spent in a lifetime. And yet, there he was, making a pretty good go at it. His rookie salary of $600 when a loaf of bread cost 5 cents was doled out in $50 paychecks twice a month. When Ruth received his first paycheck, he spent it on a bicycle. When he moved into the big money, it was sports cars. Custom suits, leather coats, silk shirts, diamond horseshoe tie pins, and frequent trips to casinos and racetracks. When there were rumors that his marriage was in trouble, Ruth bought his first wife a $5,000 mink coat. When the Yankees clinched the pennant in 1928, Ruth rented out 4 rooms and threw a party at a hotel. When he learned the hotel didn't have a piano, Ruth went and bought one. His baseball salary earned him more than the President of the United States, but he'd usually start spring training borrowing from teammates until his game checks came in. He had no idea whatsoever of money, one manager said. He didn't seem to think it would ever run out. He'd buy anything and everything. It was with great laughter that the Yankees' locker room heard Ruth tell a young Gehrig, "Save your money, a bird has to think of a time when he can't play ball no longer," for it was estimated that Babe had, by that time, blown hundreds of thousands of dollars of career earnings on the high life. He had fun along the way, more fun than a frugal man like Cato. Probably. But he also came to regret it, as did his heirs, as much as his gluttony. So many rich people find themselves in this position. The point of success was supposed to be security and freedom and contentment. In reality, it brought them anxiety, envy, and instability. "The only thing that worries me in life is money," Churchill once confessed to his brother. Unlike most of the British upper class, Churchill did work for a living, becoming one of the highest paid writers in the world. But that mattered little when he was, as his mother described him, a perfect sieve as regard to money. He earned it quickly and spent it faster, then wondered where it all went. His beloved Chartwell, an estate in the English countryside, was such an impulsive and ill-considered purchase, it almost cost him his marriage. Churchill would lose $50,000 speculating in the market in 1929. It was a terrible loss he could not begin to afford, but also from which he learned nothing. Promptly returning to the market, he lost $3,000 in a single month on Montgomery Ward stock. And that was on top of the actual gambling he did in the casinos of Europe. As if the world wasn't scary enough in Churchill's time, he would speak of the sense that he was sinking into the abyss because financially he was. He would once draw himself as an overloaded little pig, carrying a 20,000-pound weight on his back. Even during the Blitz, he was arguing with his agent over royalties and thinking about tax exemptions. Why? Why? It was ill discipline. It was an attempt to treat himself in a way his parents hadn't, to buy the love and fun he had missed out on. It was an attempt to prove himself, to keep up with the best and the brightest and richest of his time. Thankfully, Churchill was a vital and energetic man, but how much of this vitality was wasted? For what? And even if he was lucky enough to skate by, his son, who inherited his habits but not his talents, was not nearly so lucky. If only his father could have held off. When your choices turn you into someone who has to worry about money, then you are not rich no matter how much you make. Across the Atlantic, the author F. Scott Fitzgerald wore himself out in similar fashion. He was infatuated with wealth, with glamour. He was driven and ungodly talented, but also impossibly immature and in a marriage that brought out the worst in both parties. "I used to write for myself," he lamented while staring at his mountainous debts. Now he wrote to keep the collectors at bay, to dig himself out of a hole with his editors or his friends. It destroyed his confidence, stole from him the love he had for his craft. Despite lifetime earnings of what would be millions today, he would die essentially broke, in a hotel room, alone. His fortune was gone and it had come at the cost of so many lost years of great writing. "That poor son of a bitch," Dorothy Parker said as she looked down at a 44-year-old Fitzgerald in his casket. What struck her most was his worn and wrinkled hands, quietly evincing the toll of all the excess, all the indulgences, something not even the most skilled embalmer could hide. If you have money, spend it. The problem is when people spend what they don't have, to get things they don't need, at a price nowhere near worth the cost. Luckily, Churchill had just enough self-control, or perhaps good Luck that he never went fully over the edge. He never found the bottom of that abyss. But it was a close call. And how different the fate of the free world might have gone if he had. What makes you think you can afford that risk? That you're so talented the spigot will never turn off? That you can burn the candle at both ends? That you won't be corrupted by your endless need for more, more, more? It's worth taking a minute to clarify that living beyond one's means isn't the only form of reckless money management. The virtue of Cato's restraint can just as easily be taken to excess, as it perhaps even was by Cato. It's also irresponsible to be pennywise and pound foolish, to grind your life and vitality into dust trying to save minuscule amounts of money on things that don't matter. Discipline with money is relative. The internet abounds with legitimately wealthy people sharing tips on how to reuse their trash bags or stack coupons to reduce the costs of things they should not even be thinking twice about. They're not sweating the small stuff. They're sweating the microscopic. It's important to save, sure, we just want to make sure that this isn't costing us our most precious resource, time. It may well also cost us relationships with lovely people, our spouse, our children, our friends who are not quite so strict with themselves. For centuries, people on both extremes of the money spectrum have fundamentally misunderstood its value, its purpose. Fitzgerald thought that the rich were special, that they were different from other people. Hemingway would write in response, yes, they have more money. Money isn't good or bad. It is a tool. Churchill's writing, for instance, supported him when he was exiled in the political wilderness. If money provides freedom or leverage, then great. If it becomes an addiction or a disorder or worse, a distraction, not so great. Like any powerful tools, money also has its dangers and must be wielded safely and consciously, and is not for the weak-minded. Money doesn't buy happiness, but it can buy you out of some frustrations. Nor can it give you freedom, if you are dependent on it to provide you with things you don't need or more than any reasonable person actually needs. The problem is that many of us tell ourselves that someday we'll be beyond this, that if we can just earn enough, be successful enough, we won't have to consider any of it. We will be beyond moderation and financial conscientiousness. We will have transcended the everyday worries of the common man. We can just do what we want, when we want, as much as we want. Because we'll be good, we'll have arrived. Here's the thing, this never happens. Fuck you, money is a chimera. You never get it. Nobody does. Poor people have poor people problems and rich people have rich people problems because people always have problems. You're always going to be subject to the necessity of self-discipline. Or at least, you'll never be immune from the consequence of ignoring it. And is, fuck you money, really such an admirable goal anyway? To have so much money you don't have to care about anyone or anything? That's not virtue, it's childishness. All you really need is enough money to be comfortable enough to politely say, no, thanks. I'd rather not. To never have to do anything for a buck that's contrary to your values. To be able to stick with your main thing. No amount of money is ever going to truly free you. But being less dependent, caring less about money, that will free you right now. There's a quip from the Stoic Musonius Rufus who, dealing with a particularly frustrating person's greed, paid him quite a bit of money to go away. When a follower objected and pointed out the man's many faults, Musonius simply smiled and said, money is exactly what he deserves. But this can cut both ways. Plenty of people have made plenty, it doesn't have to make them worse. Lou Gehrig and Babe Ruth were both in the 0.001%. Queen Elizabeth and King George IV inherited the same priceless jewels and fortune. We decide which direction we'll go. Better or worse. A luxury or a burden. We decide whether we'll deserve what we've gotten. Get better every day. Socrates didn't know much. There wasn't much he held for certain. But he was sure, he said, that we cannot remain as we are. It doesn't matter who you are. It doesn't matter what you've done. Nobody is as good as they could be. Nobody is perfect. Everybody can improve. There are few self-fulfilling prophecies more important or more dangerous than this. If you think you have room to grow, you do, and you will. If you think you're as good as you can be, you're right. You won't get any better. It has been said that Tom Brady, the greatest quarterback in history, the youngest and the oldest to win a Super Bowl, isn't obsessed with winning. That's not what he focuses on. He's obsessed with improving the accuracy of his touchdown passes in the fourth quarter. He's obsessed with getting a little bit faster at releasing the football. He's not willing to stay the same, even though that same is very consistently the best in the league. The process of getting better, that's his drug. That's the dragon he chases. That's how he is able to defy aging and all expectations. The Japanese word for this is kaizen. Continual improvement. Always finding something to work on, to make a little progress on. Never being satisfied, always looking to grow. Revolution? Transformation? That's what amateurs chase. The pros are after evolution. If the first step is just showing up, committing to doing something each day, then the next step is finding something to focus on getting better at each day. And in this, where cumulative improvement meets compounding returns, we can harness one of the most powerful forces on earth. Think about it, most people don't even show up. Of the people who do, most don't really push themselves. So to show up and be disciplined about daily improvement, you are the rarest of the rare. And if improvement sounds difficult, how about just making fewer mistakes? This is what Gehrig's manager said about him. The secret to Gehrig's incredible trajectory as an athlete wasn't just his commitment, it was that he never made the same mistake twice. The guy who began his career blowing at least one play per inning improved to one mistake per game, to one per week, to one per month. To err is human, but to err less each day is to become closer to the divine. We not only hold ourselves to a standard, but we ratchet the standard up as we go, just as with weight training, what we're lifting should be steadily increasing with each subsequent workout. Our unwillingness to be satisfied with our performance, to be done with our progress, is what keeps us from plateauing. It drives us forward. Is it a little discouraging that we never seem to arrive? That our standards rise just out of reach of our abilities? Absolutely not. We move the goalposts so the game doesn't get boring and, more important, so it never ends. Ultimately, this brings us more pleasure and more satisfaction. We reach heights we'd never have been able to see otherwise. Do you want to be rotting or ripening? Are you getting better? Because if you are not, then you are probably getting worse. Anyone, whether they're a professional athlete or a house cleaner, can get better at their job. You can get better at being a person, a citizen, a son, or a daughter. You can get better at how you think, how you focus, what you think about. Just as one person delights in improving his farm, and another his horse, Epictetus would say, riffing, as it happens, on Socrates. So I delight in attending to my improvement day by day. He said. This is a man who clawed his way out of slavery. He said this from exile. He said this as one of the wisest men in the ancient world. And still, he was focused on how he could get better every day, in every way. One can imagine that, for Epictetus, this discipline would have been extremely helpful in those dark times. Because it gave him something to focus on, something only he controlled, not his master, not society, not his station in life. But this discipline is also helpful in the good times, too, preventing one from getting too cocky or complacent. It doesn't matter what the scoreboard says, or the bank balance, or the sales figures or the headlines. You know whether you're getting better or worse, whether you're making progress day to day. And if you are, wonderful. If you know there is room for improvement, also wonderful. Either way, your marching orders are the same. Come what may, success or failure, fame or misfortune, a focus on progress lets us look ourselves in the mirror with pride and ignore all the commotion in the background. It's the journey of a lifetime. In fact, that's the way to think about all of this, how much progress could you make if you made just a little each day over the course of an entire life? What might this journey look like? Where might it lead, if each bit of progress you made presented both the opportunity and the obligation to make a little more progress, and you seized those opportunities, you lived up to those obligations, each and every time? Will you choose to take this journey? Will you continue on even when you've reached further than you ever thought you could go? Or will you stop there? Are you going to keep practicing? Or have you decided that this is good enough? That you're good enough? Will you remain as you are? Or become what you're capable of? Because once you stop getting better, there's only one direction to go. Do the best you can, the emperor says in Marguerite Yourcenar's beautiful novel Memoirs of Hadrian. Do it over again. Then still improve, even if ever so slightly those retouches. It's a beautiful irony, you're never content with your progress and yet, you're always content because you're making progress. Share the load. In 1956, Harry Belafonte placed a call to Coretta Scott King. With her husband arrested once again, he was checking on her and whether the movement might need anything. But the two of them could barely carry on a conversation, because Coretta was continually getting pulled away from the phone to attend to one of the children, to take dinner out of the oven, to answer the door. Sensing she was doing all of this alone, Belafonte politely asked why the Kings did not have any help at home. Well, she told him, Martin simply would not permit it. Such a luxury was a stretch on a minister's salary. They were worried people might judge them. It felt wrong for the Kings to so indulge themselves, while millions of black people suffered. That is absolutely ridiculous, Belafonte replied. He's here in the middle of this movement doing all of these things, and he's going to get caught up in what people are going to think if he has somebody helping you. Your life is going to change right now, Belafonte told her. He would personally pay for staff and Martin had absolutely no say in the matter. This wasn't just a nice gesture to an overworked family. It was also a strategic move. What Belafonte was buying Martin and Coretta was not just help, it was time. It was peace of mind. It was protection. He knew that with help, they would have more energy, more focus for the cause. They'd be stronger and more effective. The last thing he wanted Martin Luther King Jr. to worry about as he marched for peace and justice was whether there was milk in the fridge. It takes discipline not to insist on doing everything yourself. Especially when you know how to do many of those things well. Especially when you have high standards about how they should be done. Even if you enjoy doing them, whether that's mowing your own lawn, writing your speeches, making your own schedule, or answering your own phone. As Plutarch reminds us, while a leader must know how to do anything, they cannot conceivably do everything. It's not physically possible. It's not mentally possible. Often, the best way to manage the load is to share the load. Woe is the person who wears themselves out on trivial matters. And then, when the big moments come, is out of energy. Woe is the person, and the people around them, who is so mentally exhausted and strung out because they've taken everything upon themselves. That now, when things go wrong, there's no slack or cushion to absorb the additional stress. A glutton isn't just someone who eats or drinks too much. Some of us are also gluttons for punishment. Gluttons for attention. Gluttons for control. Gluttons for work. What makes this so tricky to identify, let alone to manage, is that it often comes from a good place, as it did for Martin Luther King Jr. We feel obligated. We feel bad spending money. We feel guilty asking for help. No matter how well-intentioned, the outcome is the same, we wear ourselves down. We harm ourselves, we harm the cause, we neglect the main thing. We end up depriving the world of progress of the benefits of what economists call the law of comparative advantage. You have to be able to pass the ball, especially when somebody is open and has a better shot. You have to be able to share the minutes with other players, as those Spurs starters were willing to do, because that's what teams do. The insecure are unable to do this. They fear being criticized. They fear letting people see behind the scenes. Tyrants are unable to do this. Egotists are unable to do this too. The cheap are unable to do this. They want it all for themselves. They aren't strong enough to bear being anything but the center, the exclusive, the sole source of achievement. And what happens to most tyrannical regimes? They fail. It doesn't make sense to try to do everything yourself. You have to delegate. You have to find people who are good at things and empower them to help you. You have to be strong enough to hand over the keys, to relinquish control, to develop a system and organization that is bigger than just us. If you want to keep the main thing, maybe you need to hire someone who can be a buffer for you, someone who says no for you. Our willpower is not enough. We shouldn't have to just gut it out. We need to share. That is, if you're trying to scale, trying to build or do something that matters, something bigger than just you. There is a certain amount of privilege in this, sure. Not all of us can afford to hire full-time staff or have a patron willing to pick up the tab. But each of us must know what an hour of our time is worth. We must have the discipline to figure out how best to spend that time, and how to invest the fruit it bears. No matter how successful or important you are, we all have tasks that can be automated. We all have legacy tasks that ought to be reassigned. Everything in life is a team sport. You know these inefficiencies exist, and yet you refuse to delegate them. You continue to try to do everyone's job. Stop procrastinating. Delegate. This will not be cheap, and it would be ignorant and arrogant to insist otherwise, but the value is virtually incalculable, because it affords you the most expensive thing in the world, time. By compelling Martin Luther King Jr. to delegate, Belafonte was giving the man and by extension, society more time to do his essential work. Figuratively, we all face a ticking clock, but King's was tragically shorter. Every minute that he and Coretta didn't have to spend on chores at home was time well spent. But also what of the time they got to spend together? Because delegation doesn't just provide time but also space freedom. It allows us to breathe, to think, to connect, to appreciate. King was later asked by an interviewer what he would do with an uninterrupted week of rest. After scoffing at the pure impossibility of such a thing, given the injustices of the world and the demands of the civil rights movement at the time, King explained what he would do. If I had the luxury of an entire week, I would spend it meditating and reading, refreshing myself spiritually and intellectually. Amidst the struggle, amidst the frustrations, amidst the endless work, I often reflect that I am forever giving, never pausing to take in. I feel urgently the need for even an hour of time to get away, to withdraw, to refuel. I need more time to think through what is being done, to take time out from the mechanics of the movement, to reflect on the meaning of the movement. What would you manage to do with a week like this? With an hour? With a little help that would allow you to carve out some extra time and space for yourself? But not just any kind of time. Time to reflect and to think. And not just any kind of space. Space to learn. Space to plan. Together, that little bit of time and space each day combine to form an opportunity to meditate on what is important to us and to examine how we're doing in life. You deserve that. But there's only one way you'll get it. It's by delegating. It's by asking for help. It's by making a change. Respect time. As a rookie for the New York Knicks, a young Phil Jackson mostly rode the bench. One night, toward the end of a game, Jackson was in the middle of a conversation with another backup when the coach, Red Halsman, caught him by surprise. "How much time is left, Jackson?" he demanded. 1 minute and 28 seconds, he answered. "No, how much time is on the shot clock?" Red replied, and of course, Jackson didn't know. "Well, you've got to know," the disgusted coach told him. "You may be going into the game, and if you don't know the time, you could get us in trouble. Don't let me catch you doing that again. We are all given the same 24 hours each day, just as each basketball team is given 24 seconds per possession on the court. To not be aware of it? To not respect it? To not know how to use and manage it? It is not just sloppy, it's stupid." You're in the game, always. You've got to know the time precisely. Because you will never know when it's going to run out on you. That's what the reminder memento mori means. No one can take time or life for granted as it runs out for all of us. The pursuit of discipline means being disciplined in all things. Especially little things. And time, how we spend it, it's tiny. Increments is something small that actually amounts to something very large. Some people claim that time is just a construct. If that is true, it is perhaps humanity's greatest creation. Because time is the way we measure the only truly non-renewable resource we have. No one is making more of it. Once lost, it cannot be recovered. It is also an incredibly powerful force, as anyone who has ever watched small amounts of interest applied over a long enough period can attest. You see, time that is wasted is also wasting us. When we kill time, we are killing ourselves. We have to learn how to use time or else it will use us up. That is why we do our work promptly. Why we get to the point. Why we stick to the agenda. Why we don't drone on, don't tolerate digressions or indulge distractions. It's why we keep our desk clean. So we don't waste time looking for stuff. It's why we get up early. So we have more time, uninterrupted time, at the freshest part of the day. It's why we're deliberate about what we say yes and no to. Because we understand that time is a gift and what we give it to matters. More practically, the poet W. H. Auden said that the modern Stoic knows that the surest way to discipline passion is to discipline time. Decide what you want or ought to do during the day, then always do it exactly the same moment every day, and passion will give you no trouble. Now, one doesn't have to follow this advice literally to still see the deeper message. Routine is an essential tool in the management of time and the suppression of those negative forces of distraction, procrastination, and laziness. The person who wakes up whenever, wakes up, and does whatever, orders their day however. This is a person who will never have enough time, who will always be behind. But the more disciplined person, the Toni Morrison, who gets up when they ought to, the person like William Stafford, who tackles the hard projects first, who, like Booker T. Washington, says no to what is not essential. This is a person who makes full use of their time. Take a minute to think about how you spent the last year, the last month, the last week, the last day. Think about how much of it was wasted, how much of it was half-assed, how much of it was spent in reaction to things out of your control. And even if you have decent results to show for this time, still, you could have done better. We all could have. The moments between the moments we let pass us by, the things we did lazily and had to do again, the things we agreed to that we shouldn't have. We could have done all those things better. Except we can't. There is simply no escaping the fact that those moments are gone forever, that you will never get that time back. You missed opportunities to get better. You missed opportunities to make progress. You didn't let patience work to your advantage. You disrespected other people, who you made wait. You disrespected your cause, which you deprived of your presence. But the silver lining of this tragedy is that life has given you a second chance. At least for now. Because you have today. You have the present moment. How will you spend it? What will you make of it? What will it amount to? And let's be clear, that doesn't just mean hurrying along. Queen Elizabeth's mother was once rushed along at a public event by an aide who claimed they were out of time. Time is not my dictator, the Queen Mother said as she stopped and shook hands with each person who had waited to see her. I dictate to time. While time is ultimately the dictator of our presence here on this earth, we do dictate how we spend it. As long as we are aware of it. Aware of its value and the importance of managing it well. As long as we are putting it to work for us, even as it is working against us in the mortal sense. Now is the time. Because now is the only time you have. Put up boundaries. George Washington was famous for his reserve, keeping his emotions and personal feelings to himself. Angela Merkel's closest aides have never seen inside her apartment. It's remarkable to think that after an entire lifetime in front of the cameras for Queen Elizabeth, after meeting so many people, after So many appearances and speeches in audiences with world leaders, almost no one can answer that tantalizing, fascinating question. What is the Queen like? Imagine, she has never once spoken on the record to a reporter in 7 decades. The Shah of Iran once asked her if, over her reign, she'd had more Labour or Conservative prime ministers. As it happened, the Queen didn't know because it wasn't her business. It wouldn't have been appropriate. Elizabeth is not just an observer of the various rules of her profession, her restraint goes further than just not getting involved in politics. Her grandchildren attest that she rarely gives them explicit advice and never tells them what they must do. Instead, she finds that the right question, or better, just a non-judgmental ear, allows them to figure it out for themselves. All this in a word: boundaries. And sadly, this kind of discipline is all too rare these days. In a world of social media, instant gratification, and the celebration of shamelessness, we don't much respect people who establish and maintain boundaries. You know, minding your own business. Setting the rules of engagement. Keeping your private life private. Not letting people drag you down into the muck. Not getting entangled in other people's dysfunctions, or entangling them in yours. Being strong enough to communicate what you like and dislike. Respecting other people's space and preferences. This is seemingly basic stuff that basically nobody has a handle on. Think of all the words we have to describe people like this: oversharers, hot messes, doormats, drama queens, busybodies, pushovers, shit-stirrers, gossip mongers. We live in a time of vulgarity and silliness and immaturity and selfishness. A time of freedom that we have decided is actually license for stupidity, unseriousness, and excess. Look at our heroes. Reality TV stars, influencers, professional wrestlers, YouTubers, demagogues. These are not heroes. These are cautionary tales. The people we ought to admire are quiet, dignified, reserved, serious, professional, respectful of themselves and others. Plutarch reminded leaders that they were unlikely to warrant much in the way of worship from their subjects if they were too often seen around the fire, munching on beans. He was talking about the kind of distance and reserve that Queen Elizabeth and Angela Merkel and George Washington all practiced. Cato, for his part, was an avid defender of what was known as the mos maiorum. You know, the unspoken and yet also spoken way of life of your grandparents. Those rules, somewhere between manners and morals, that tell us how to act, how to treat people, how to carry ourselves, what to do when you get a speeding ticket, or what to do when there is space between what we can get away with and what the laws or rules say. But it's about more than just that. Boundaries are about drawing some lines around yourself. Healthy borders between what you'll share and what you won't, what you'll accept and what you won't, how you treat others and how you expect to be treated, what is your responsibility and what isn't. Or as Jay-Z explained once, particularly in regard to adjusting to his success and fame, it's about knowing who you are, and just doing what's comfortable for you, and not letting people pull you in 1,000 different directions. Because if you allow it, people will have you doing all kinds of stuff, but it has to make sense for you. Keeping the main thing is impossible if you're not capable of saying no or pushing back when others put too much on your plate. You can't keep your head about you in stressful situations. If you have no idea who you are or what you stand for, you can't be a strong parent if you're a mess or if you're still letting your parents walk all over you. How will you get anything done if the temptations of social media rule your life? How can you get back up after a failure if you are overly concerned with what other people think of you? You won't do your best work if you're constantly micromanaging everyone else's. There is a term, energy vampires, meant to describe the kind of people who, because of their lack of boundaries, suck others dry. With their neediness, their selfishness, their dysfunction, and their drama. Not only must you not be an energy vampire yourself, but you must be aware that these type of people exist. You must be strong enough to keep them at arm's distance even if they're Beautiful, even if they're talented, even if they're family or old friends. From childhood, even if their helplessness calls to the most empathetic part of yourself. A country without borders, it has been said, is not really a country at all. So it goes with people. Without boundaries, we are overwhelmed. We are stretched too thin. So thin that those features that previously defined us start to disappear until there's no telling where we start and the energy vampires around us end. This is why we clean up our desk. This is why we ignore provocations that have nothing to do with us. This is why we don't speak every thought that pops into our head, why we have to figure out how to be responsible with our finances and manage our time efficiently. Why we go to bed on time, every time, and wake up early every morning. Because we are trying to corral our lives, our emotions, our concerns in such a way that it's possible to manage them all. That we are controlling them instead of the other way around. Understand, most of the people doing important work are people you've never heard of. They want it that way. Most happy people don't need you to know how happy they are. They aren't thinking about you at all. Everyone is going through something, but some people choose not to vomit their issues on everyone else. The strongest people are self-contained. They keep themselves in check. They keep their business where it belongs, their business. Is it true that some people will get away with conduct unbecoming of an insert? Yes. They may even have fun or get rich doing it. And our boundaries leave that concern to them. We know that in the end they are punishing themselves. As William Penn famously said, those with strong boundaries are so much more their own that, paying common dues, they are rulers of all the rest. Set your boundaries. Enforce them gently but firmly. Treat everyone else's with as much respect as you'd want for your own. Be the adult in a world of emotional children. Do your best. A promising young officer named Jimmy Carter was applying for a spot in the Navy's nuclear submarine program. There he sat for more than 2 hours, across from Admiral Hyman Rickover, who not only created the world's first nuclear navy through sheer willpower, but he ran it with an intense focus for the next 3 decades, which included interviewing, in person, every single person who would touch his prized submarines. As they sat and talked, they covered a wide range of topics from current events to naval tactics, electronics, and physics. Carter had prepared for weeks for the interview and sweated through each question, as Rickover, never smiling, steadily ratcheted up the difficulty. Then finally, he lobbed what seemed like a softball. How did you stand in your class in the Naval Academy? Sir, I stood 59th in a class of 820, Carter said, swelling with pride. But having seen, by then, generations of America's best military talent, Rickover was not particularly impressed by rank. But did you do your best? He asked the young man. Of course, Carter felt himself rushing to answer, as we all might if asked such a question. But before he could, something inside stopped short. What about the times he had been tired? What about the classes when he'd been confident enough in his grades that he could coast? What about the questions he hadn't asked or the times he'd been distracted? What about the professors he'd found boring and paid little attention to? What about the extra reading he could have done on weapons systems, on history, on science, on trigonometry? What about the morning PT he'd shuffled through? No, sir, he found himself confessing, I didn't always do my best. And with this, Rickover got up to leave, asking one final question before he departed. Why not? Why didn't you do your best? It was a question that would take many shapes, and challenge, and inspire the young man in many ways for the rest of his life. As in, why are you holding back? Why are you half-assing this? Why are you so afraid to try? Why don't you think this matters? What could you be capable of if you really committed? If you are not giving your best, why are you doing it at all? You might think from this exchange that Rickover was a ruthless taskmaster who refused to accept excuses for failure. This is partly correct. His exacting standards, which he expected of himself and anyone he hired, not only transformed the United States into a global power, but it also propelled Carter eventually, into the presidency. Still, in his single term, Carter's successes: no foreign wars, a peace settlement between Israel and Egypt, negotiating and ratifying the Panama Canal treaties, normalizing diplomatic relations with the People's Republic of China were also accompanied by struggles. One such area was in energy policy, where, in a 1977 address to the nation, a forward-thinking Carter declared energy and climate change the moral equivalent to war. Although he knew his proposals were going to be unpopular among the American people, he said, "It was impossible for me to imagine the bloody legislative battles ahead." He'd fight the war against Congress for his entire term and was mocked for putting solar panels on the White House. Despite his efforts and his sincerity, Carter fell short. Rickover, the ruthless taskmaster, nonetheless beamed with pride. There is no question that the public will ultimately understand, and he will be regarded as a far-seeing man who has attempted to protect the people of the U.S., he said of Carter's energy efforts. It took about 400 years for the Lord Jesus Christ to have his message accepted. Up to that time he would be considered a failure. As long as a man is trying as hard as he can to do what he thinks to be right, he is a success, regardless of the outcome. This is the wonderful thing about doing your best. It insulates you, ever so slightly, from outcomes as well as ego. It's not that you don't care about results. It's that you have a kind of trump card. Your success doesn't go to your head because you know you're capable of more. Your failures don't destroy you because you are sure there wasn't anything more you could have done. You always control whether you give your best or not. No one can stop you from that. You don't have to end up number one in your class, or win everything, every time. In fact, not winning is not particularly important. What does matter is that you gave everything, because anything less is to cheat the gift. The gift of your potential. The gift of the opportunity. The gift of the craft you've been introduced to. The gift of the responsibility entrusted to you. The gift of the instruction and time of others. The gift of life itself. Ralph Ellison was a student at the Tuskegee Institute when his piano teacher Hazel Harrison gave him the gift not just of her time and energy but also a way of thinking about the obligation that every performer and talented person has. You must always play your best, she had told him, even if it's only in the waiting room at Chaha Station, because in this country there'll always be a little man hidden behind the stove who knows the music and the tradition, and the standards of musicianship required for whatever you've set out to perform. Chaha Station was the train station outside the campus. The little man behind the stove? That became the artistic conscience that guided Ellison, much like the way Rickover's standards hovered over Carter, just like the dictum of John Wooden guided his players from the day of his first lesson in the basics of putting on a pair of socks. Your best is good enough. Not perfect. Your best. Leave the rest to the scoreboard, to the judges, to the gods, to fate, to the critics. Beyond the temperament. Rarely does a person who competes with his head as well as his body come out second. Pete Carroll. T would be wonderful if being smart or brilliant, successful or powerful, was a free pass. It emphatically is not. Beyond the temperament. Rarely does a person who competes with his head as well as his body come out second. Pete Carroll. It would be wonderful if being smart or brilliant, successful or powerful, was a free pass. It emphatically is not. In fact, we find that because of our talents, because of our resources, because of our responsibilities, we have to be more in command of ourselves. We have to consciously, considerately, constantly check ourselves, check our impulses. We must follow that old dictum to know thyself physically and mentally, and to follow it with a second and equally ancient dictum. Nothing in excess. We work hard, we think hard, we hold hard to high standards. If we do this consistently, we will be happy and productive. And in those rare instances when we fail, which we will be all right. Not only because we'll know, in our hearts, that we did our best, but because we have the strength and character to endure setbacks on our journey. We'll have the determination and the balance to get Back up and keep going. If we don't, if we fall into excess, if we lapse on our standards, what then? If we are careless and lazy, sloppy, and weak, if we stop attending to our improvement, the great Epictetus tells us we will stop making progress and we will live and die as ordinary, disappointing people. But it is more than that. Speaking of Alcibiades, the once promising and committed student of Socrates, Plutarch illustrated the costs of intemperance not just to ourselves but also to the people who depend on us. His lack of discipline and the audacity of his way of life destroyed him, and he deprived the city of all his benefits on account of his extravagance and licentiousness. Self-discipline is not just our destiny, it is our obligation to our potential, to our country, to our cause, to our families, to our fellow human beings, to those who look up to us, to those who come after us. Because soon enough you will be truly tested beyond the ordinary ways in which you have had to persist and resist on this journey toward your best self. Life will demand something greater, something bordering on heroic. Your body, your mind, your spirit